Chapter 1579. Qin Hao controlled the Matrix, and the sole power of all the disciples of the Divine Palace gathered toward Chen Wanqin. Chen Wanqin released the ice will and covered the peacock's wings. The wings completely turned into ice wings. As soon as the word / fell, the wings swept forward with terrifying sharpness. The endless space was swept away and frozen as they slashed straight at the huge body of the flaming tiger. The Peak Ren Huang leading the flaming tiger was shocked. The void was frozen, and this ice will was unprecedentedly strong. Even though they formed a matrix and had the matrix power to resist, they still felt that their spiritual souls were about to be frozen. The tiger roared in the sky, and the power of the flame of the great path burned wildly. The tiger's paw wrapped in flames slapped down and collided with the peacock's wings. At this moment, the tiger's paw was cut open, and the peacock's wings continued to slash forward, spreading across the huge tiger's body. The flames on the tiger's body were frozen. Puff! A light cut through the void. Countless spectators saw that the flaming tiger turned into a huge ice sculpture, motionless in the void, as if it was dead. Immediately afterward, cracks spread across the tiger's body and began to crack inch by inch. With a crash, it collapsed into countless ice cubes. The battle matrix disintegrated on the spot, and all the Renhuangs in the matrix were covered in ice. Lifeless corpses fell into the city. So strong! It can't even withstand a single blow. Shocking! Too shocking! The warriors of the southern region, who were watching the battle from afar, trembled. They were all in a battle matrix composed of Renhuangs, but the people of Southern Pride were killed with a single blow. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed it. The disparity in strength was too great. This blow not only destroyed the power of the battle matrix but also completely annihilated all the Renhuangs. Were the group of monsters that formed the peacock divine bird Renhuangs or a group of Emperors Yuan? This scene brought extreme shock to the onlookers. However, at the same time, the Southern Pride sword matrix also arrived. The 100-foot-long sword aura spurted forward and pierced the peacock's abdomen with the power to penetrate it. But this sword didn't produce the scene that everyone imagined. When the sword aura pierced the peacock's body, it pushed the divine bird all the way forward. Even though the void was raging with the terrifying sword aura, it still couldn't tear the peacock apart. It hurts. Within the array, Xiaogua let out a painful groan. He activated the demon ox body and pushed his powerful palms forward. The skin on his arms burst open and blood flowed out continuously. Beside him, Gu Qi had transformed into an iron rhinoceros. His body was also covered in sword scars. All the Xiantian Peak disciples had been killed by the sword Qi and suffered different injuries. However, the power of this sword was firmly blocked by the people of Xiantian Peak. They were like layers of steel plates that could not be pierced. 400 high-level Renhuangs formed a sword formation. How can its power be weak? However, this is the extent of the primitive emperors in the outside world. Destroy the sword formation. Qin Hao shouted. Let me do it. Lei Jiao suddenly clenched his fist. His burly body surged with a terrifying thunder Dao might. All right. With Qin Hao's thoughts, the soul power of the Divine Palace disciples in the array frantically poured into the Thunder Jiao's body. The Thunder Flood Dragon's eyes widened. He felt that Yi Futian's power was boundless. The might of the Way of Thunder in his body burst out at an unimaginable level. It was as if he had become the soul of the peacock divine bird. Ka-cha-cha. Endless thunderbolts wrapped around the peacock divine bird. The lightning was extremely dazzling. It had completely turned into a thunderbird. It was as if the great path had condensed into thunder. The void within a radius of 100 feet was turned into a sea of lightning intertwined with lightning. Go to hell! The Thunder Flood Dragon roared. The peacock's sharp claws stretched out and grabbed the sword light in his abdomen. The sharp claws sank in little by little. The terrible power of thunder poured into the sword light. As for the people in the southern arrogance sword matrix, their expressions changed drastically. They saw terrible thunderbolts invading their heads. Bolts of heavenly thunder struck down, falling on everyone's body and striking their spiritual souls. At this moment, it was as if doomsday had arrived in the sword matrix. Boom! Bang! There was a spectacular explosion. The sword light that flew across the void collapsed under the peacock's claws. Thunder and lightning filled the sky. Countless bodies spat out blood in the sea of thunder. It was as if they were about to spit out their internal organs. They kept falling from the sky. Many Renhuangs had died before they landed. Their spiritual souls were buried in the thunder. Another blow. Everyone was shocked. Divine thunder of the heavens. What kind of damage was that? The two southern arrogant Renhuang battle matrices did not survive a single blow from the peacock. The peacock divine bird was like a god-king dominating the sky. It was extremely powerful and invincible. Die! The dragon king of Jiutian swooped down. Xianyuan Wuying's angry roar sounded in the sky. The two southern arrogant Renhuang battle matrices were destroyed. Although the impact on him was equally strong, this was a battlefield. No matter what happened, killing the enemy was the only goal. Moreover, the enemy who killed his son was in the peacock battle matrix. The sharp dragon claws clasped the peacock's neck and penetrated it bit by bit. The dragon's body pressed down on the peacock's head, crushing it all the way down. The battle matrix formed by the direct descendants of the Xianyuan royal family was far more powerful than the Renhuangs from other sects. After all, the warriors in the matrix were of the same bloodline as Xianyuan Wuying. They had the same kind of blood flowing in their veins. The infinite gravity of the great path pierced into the peacock battle matrix. The suppressive force was very strong. With just one blow, all the disciples of the divine palace in the matrix had blood gushing out of their mouths. They felt as if their bodies were carrying a heavy mountain. They could not support it and were forced down. Guard your spiritual soul. Just pour out your soul power. North Gate Xuanda, Tangung, heal everyone. Qin Hao raised his palms high. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on his head. His arms trembled violently. Dense dragon scales grew, but in the next second, they exploded and shattered. In a battle matrix, no one could change the overall situation. Even though Qin Hao's art of endless samsara could restrain the gravity of the Xianyuan family to a certain extent, the force above his head was far beyond what he could bear. He could not resist it. Beams of medicine souls flashed and shuttled through the matrix. They lingered on every disciple of the divine palace. The internal injuries suffered by everyone were temporarily alleviated. Fortunately, Senior Brother let us get in touch with the people of the Xianyuan family in advance. We learned about their gravity attacks and gradually adapted to it. Otherwise, we might not have been able to bear it, a disciple of the divine palace said. Even though they had been mentally prepared, when Xianyuan Wuying activated the power of the matrix, they were still injured. Fortunately, it was us. If it were other Renhuangs, they would have broken the matrix even if they did not die. A voice sounded. Everyone nodded. They did not doubt it. If the Zheng clan's Xuanwu Black Turtle had taken it, the battle matrix would have been broken. After all, the Xianyuan family was an imperial family. The power of their bloodline was tyrannical. In fact, many of their talents were not much weaker than the disciples of the divine palace. For example, Xianyuan Jie, Xianyuan Feng, Xianyuan Di, and the other rising stars. However, the most talented descendants of the Xianyuan family were all killed by Qin Hao. What's more, they were from the same family. The power of the battle matrix was extremely pure. They were not like them. They came from all over the continent and were pieced together by the disciples of various families. Even though everyone's talent was extraordinary, the degree of soul power fusion was not as perfect as the Xianyuan family. Qin Hao, if we don't fight back, the matrix will be dispelled sooner or later. Fairy Qian Ning's hair was a little messy, and her heart was beating faster and faster. The feeling of a heavy mountain pressing down on her head, and her body falling rapidly, was very uncomfortable. She saw that the peacock matrix light had been torn apart, and the rules invading the matrix were getting stronger and stronger. If they did not make an effective counterattack, they would really be crushed by the gravity of the Xianyuan family. If they lost the first battle, they could not afford to lose the face of the Divine Palace. Alcade Sound Technique, Spiritual Attack. Qin Hao ordered. Their soul power was chaotic and not as pure as the Xianyuan family. However, chaos had its advantages. At least they would gain more than the other party. The Xianyuan family only knew a single gravity attack. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Beams of light flashed in the matrix. The disciples of the Alcade Peak looked at each other and nodded in tacit understanding. One of them stretched out his hand and pressed it on the strings of the guqin. Heavenly sound resonance. Clang. 10 fingers plucked, and the rest of the instruments played at the same time. All the sounds were wrapped around the body of K or under Qin Hao's feet. Screech. The rainbow skylark let out a sonorous cry, and the peacock divine bird formed by the matrix resonated at the same time. After all, this battle matrix was based on K-er, and the cry of the skylark was more lethal. The cries of the K-er resounded, extremely loud and clear. It was as if the real divine peacock king had exploded with anger. The turbulent sound waves shook the void, and layers of sound waves continued to blast into the golden divine dragon matrix. Suddenly, Xianyuan Wuying and the others' eyes widened and became bloodshot. They only felt that the cries of the K or outside the matrix were directly affecting their minds, trying to destroy their souls. Chapter 1580. The peacock's cry invaded their minds, and a 7-colored divine bird appeared in the minds of countless people in the matrix, pecking at their souls. Many people's faces turned pale, and blood flowed from the corners of their mouths. Their will was weakened. Faintly, the golden dragon battle matrix showed signs of instability. Rules and will suppression. Xianyuan Wuying controlled the battle matrix, and the golden dragon's claws released the peacock. It rose into the air and turned its head to let out a dragon's roar. The dragon's roar shook the heavens and earth, forming a storm of the great path that covered the peacock's body, completely swallowing the cry. At this time, there were no more cries of the peacock, only the fierce roar of the dragon remained. Infinite power of rules gathered in the storm, crushing the peacock's body and continuing to bombard it. Change the matrix. 40 to 50 Yaoguang Peak disciples were obviously no match for hundreds of Renhuang. The direct descendants of the Xianyuan family gathered together to perform the rules of gravity, and it was indeed no small matter. Qin Hao made a prompt decision to change the matrix. Buzz. Infinite light erupted from the peacock's body, and the huge divine bird's phantom shrank until it gradually condensed into an arrow. The arrow was wrapped in blood-red demonic flames, and it was extremely fierce. At this time, Qin Hao took out the great void divine sword and held it above his head with both hands. Using his body like a bow, the sunset heart technique in his body surged, and the soul power of all the disciples of the divine palace rushed towards him. For a time, the arrow outside burst with an extremely shocking light, as if it could shoot down the sun and moon. A blood-red light pierced out, and no matter how strong the storm was, the arrow aimed at a point and rushed forward with all its might. It flew out of the center of the storm and stopped in the void. The light of the arrow dispersed, and the phantom of the peacock divine king appeared again. Boss, Sister Wanqin and I can perform rule fusion techniques, Yi Shuihan said. Ice and water complemented each other, and they had tried it at Daozong Peak. Okay. Qin Hao had absolute confidence in the two. One was the sacred ice spirit body, and the other was the water god body. They had both comprehended the rudiments of rules, and when their soul power merged, the power could be imagined. Looking at the disciples of Daozong Peak, Qin Hao asked loudly, Daozong Imperial Method, Empress Wa Holy Spirit Method, how many of you have cultivated it? This Many disciples lowered their heads. Empress Hua Holy Spirit method was the imperial method of Daozong Peak, and non-direct disciples were not qualified to cultivate it. Me. Jing Qingqi and Fairy Qian Ning were both direct disciples of Daozong Peak. Naturally, they were qualified to learn the supreme imperial techniques of Daozong Peak. The Empress Hua Holy Spirit art was extremely powerful. It could increase a martial artist's vital qi and increase the destructive power of their spells. However, it was also very difficult to cultivate. Even though he had yet to grasp the essence of the technique, he was still able to use it. Thunder Flood Dragon, Sea Sand, activate the 9 Palaces battle with me. Dilly, fellow junior brothers and sisters, channel your soul power to the 5 of us. Qin Hao clenched his fists, and a beam of dazzling golden light shot out from his palms. His feet, knees, back and heart were all pierced by golden beams of light. Monstrous battle intent permeated the formation, as if he had transformed into the body of a war god. Yagong, you monster! Thunder Flood Dragon's heart trembled. In the 9 Palaces battle with Dilly, Qin Hao had opened 8 palaces. He only needed to open 1 more Tianling point to complete the 9 palaces. He must have asked the Mizar Peak Venerable to give him special treatment in private. Sea Sand and Thunder Flood Dragon looked at each other, and beams of dazzling golden light burst out from their bodies. They had opened 7 palaces at the same time, 1 less than Qin Hao. However, the battle intent was fierce and ferocious. Sister Wanqin, Yi Shuihan shouted. Qin Wanqin nodded. Endless will of the great path of ice swept out. Her body shone with crystal light, and she looked like a transparent ice sculpture. She gave off a holy feeling of the Ice Empress. Yi Shuihan's soul power surged, and his body was covered by a silver water armor. Under the water armor, his figure became slender and well-proportioned. His body exuded a faint divine aura, as if a water god had descended to the world. Yi Shuihan stared at the golden dragon battle formation and shouted, "Ice and water flow together. Why do you have such a strange name?" Qin Hao was a little speechless. He should have been more domineering so that others would think he was powerful. As the crown prince of Luoshui, where was his education? How embarrassing! Buzz. Yi Shuihan waved the trident in his hand, and where the light of the trident passed, it formed an endless sea. The torrent was like a raging wave, swallowing up the heavens and the universe. Qin Wanqin closed her beautiful eyes, and she was like an ice goddess chanting quietly. She muttered something, and endless ice and snow spread out from her body, crazily covering the void. And in the outside world, the spectators were shocked to see that as soon as the divine peacock broke free from the storm, it flapped its wings at the same time. Its left wing slapped down, and a terrifying water flow blasted out like an ocean that wanted to swallow the sky. Below its right wing, ice and snow raged, forming a terrifying snowstorm. Ice and snow, 2 torrents of the great path, surged forward and merged midway, condensing into a terrifying ice pillar. At this moment, the endless space was filled with Tao of ice. The ice pillar extended all the way to the Golden Dragon battle formation. Everywhere it passed, the space was frozen. Wu Ying, don't resist it head-on. On the top of the sky, Xianyuan Gaoyan's face turned pale. Ice and water flowed together, and the 2 Tao of ice merged. It was a nomological fusion technique. Moreover, the power supporting this Tao of ice was very terrifying, almost exceeding the limit of Renhuang. Whether it was vitality or battle will, it was impeccable. Not to mention Renhuang, even the lower-level Dharch would not be able to exert such extreme power. Anyone below the Dharch realm would be doomed. Roar. The Golden Dragon battle formation was naturally aware of the horror of this attack. Everyone in the formation, including Xianyuan Wuing, felt a strong sense of crisis. The dragon's body crazily wriggled, shuttling through the void, madly sprinting forward, trying to escape the domain covered by the Tao of ice. However, No matter how fast the Golden Dragon battle formation was, how could it be faster than the power of the Great Path? The disciples of the Divine Palace condensed into a whole with the help of the formation. Wherever their minds were, the infinite space was frozen. Kacha. The heavens seemed to be still, and the entire sky above the imperial city turned into a world of ice crystals. It was glittering and extremely spectacular. It could be said that a sacred scene had descended. However, the most eye-catching thing was the dragon in the sky. The originally dazzling golden dragon had completely fallen into the ice layer at this time. The golden scales all over its body had turned into ice crystals, and it had turned into a beautiful ice dragon. It was very dazzling. It was stuck in place motionlessly, maintaining its swimming posture. From its posture, it seemed to be desperately trying to escape. But in the end, it was swallowed up by the great path of ice. Chapter 1581. The great path of ice covered the sky, and the golden dragon was trapped inside. It was completely sealed, and there was no way to escape. Behind them, there was a loud rumbling sound, and an icicle shot through the air. A blizzard raged along the way, trying to destroy the golden dragon battle matrix. In the battle matrix, Xianyuan Wuying and the others were suppressed by the will of the great path of ice. The power of ice permeated the battle matrix and enveloped everyone. Everyone's body became stiff, and their spiritual souls seemed to be frozen by the will. However, their consciousness was very clear. Seeing the icicle coming from behind, everyone frantically urged their soul power. The power of the bloodline of the Xianyuan royal family gathered together, forming a terrifying gravity of the great path. At this critical juncture of life and death, no one dared to hold back and gave it their all. Invisible shock waves spread out from the golden dragon's body, and the gravity of the great path swept out, gradually shattering the ice layer. In the sky above, the boundless space became distorted. The icicle shot forward, intertwining with the gravity of the great path. Countless ice crystals were destroyed by the rules and fell down. The front of the icicle was constantly breaking apart. However, Yishuahan's water spirit was restored, and ice continued to grow in the broken areas. He actually charged forward against the gravity of the great path. Finally, with a heavy bang, the icicle hit the dragon's body. Whoosh! The dense shattering sound rang through the space, as if a force had shattered a mirror, and the divine dragon in the mirror was shattered as well. At this moment, countless pieces of ice fell from the sky, and the golden dragon battle matrix disintegrated. The figures of Renhuang spat out blood and fell madly into the city. Every body was covered in frost as if they had just fallen out of an ice cellar. Even though the members who formed the Golden Dragon battle matrix were the direct descendants of the Xianyuan royal family, and they had the most orthodox gravity of the Great Path, they could not withstand the attack of the disciples of the Divine Palace. This attack destroyed the matrix. Moreover, all the members of the royal family suffered varying degrees of injuries, and a few of them died directly. Xianyuan Wuying spat out vermilion blood, and his limbs were stiff. He could not move, and his body fell from the sky. He looked at the divine peacock, and through the brilliant matrix light, he seemed to be able to see Qin Hao inside. At this moment, his eyes were filled with endless hatred and murderous intent. Unfortunately, he was defeated. Back then, in Golden Light City, when Qin Hao faced him, he could only hide behind Duanmu Qinghui, and in the end, had to flee in a sorry state. But 3 years later, the person who killed his son had the strength to defeat him head-on. One could imagine how Xianyuan Wuying felt. If he could do it all over again, he would have risked everything to keep Qin Hao alive in Golden Light City. Then, he would not have been attacked at home today. Hate. Endless hatred. Powerless hatred. He hated Qin Hao and himself. Xianyuan Wuying. Qin Hao's roar resounded in the sky. His red lotus fiery eyes flickered as he caught a glimpse of that aura in the midst of the chaos. Immediately, the peacock flapped its wings and the battle matrix swooped down with its sharp claws. It could crush Xianyuan Wuying into minced meat with just a gentle clench. However, at this moment there was a pressure coming from above. Then, a pitch-black divine rock let out a sharp cry and pressed down. Its equally sharp claws stepped on the peacock's wings. Its sharp claws were like hooks, crushing layer by layer, tearing the peacock into pieces like a madman. This divine rock battle matrix was also formed by the direct descendants of the Xianyuan royal family. Its attack power was extremely strong. Of course, compared to the Golden Dragon battle matrix led by Xianyuan Wuying, it was naturally weaker. Originally, the rock battle matrix and another battle matrix of the southern Ao were attacking the divine beast Xuanwu with all their might. But before the battle began, the Zheng clan might have foreseen that they were no match for it. So, the Xuanwu battle matrix only defended and did not attack. It firmly protected its weaknesses and only exposed its shell for the rock to ravage. Even so, with the other battle matrix of the southern Ao joining forces to attack, the Xuanwu suddenly clashed and fell into a dangerous situation. Countless Renhuang in the matrix were injured. If they were given a little more time, in less than 10 breaths, they could break through and slaughter everyone in the matrix in one fell swoop. However, Xianyuan Wuying's 3 battle matrices were no match for the peacock. The divine rock had to turn around to help. After all, Xianyuan Wuying was the son of the imperial lord and Xianyuan Wuba's brother. No matter what, they could not leave him alone. Buzz! The great path of gravity invaded the matrix. The disciples of the divine palace suddenly felt the pressure rise sharply, and there was the feeling of a heavy mountain pressing down on them. The blood in their bodies flowed uncontrollably. Many people were dizzy, and blood oozed from their ears and noses. Their consciousness seemed to be suppressed. Resonance of heavenly sound. The divine peacock continued to sing. The sharp cries turned into sound waves that enveloped the rock, rolling it into the intertwining rhythm. The sound technique interfered with the spiritual soul. In an instant, the matrix light that was maintaining the rock began to fluctuate, and the matrix power began to become unstable. But this rock was very stubborn. Obviously, it knew that once it let go of its claws, Xianyuan Wuying would die without a doubt. It was still crazily tearing at the peacock's matrix light, and the matrix light was constantly torn to pieces by it. "Let's use the ice and water flow together again," Qin Hao shouted. Yi Shuihan and Chen Wanqin's faces were slightly pale. They had consumed a lot of energy just now. It was not just them. After several bloody battles, they had destroyed 3 battle matrices formed by Renhuang of the same plane. Everyone here had consumed a lot of energy. Even so, they still obeyed Qin Hao's orders. They gritted their teeth and urged their soul power, instilling it into Lei Jiao, Hai Sha, Zheng Qinqi, and Goddess Qian Ning. Suddenly, the 2 great imperial methods of the divine palace appeared again, and all of them poured into the matrix power. The divine peacock burst into an extremely dazzling stream of colorful light. Ice and water raged and clung to the rock's body. Endless snowstorms raged in the void, and the 2 divine birds were swallowed up by this force. In the outside world, the spectators were shocked to see a huge snowstorm falling from the sky like a towering iceberg. When it fell halfway, it suddenly stopped. Immediately, the peacock's cry was loud and clear, and a huge colorful matrix shadow soared out. The second the peacock flew away, the raging snowstorm in the sky disappeared, leaving only a crystal-clear black rock frozen in place. With a shattering sound, the rock cracked inch by inch and turned into shattered ice crystals, disappearing before everyone's eyes. Another blow. The warriors of the southern region were shocked beyond words. The peacock, the overlord of the sky, was really invincible. In this battle, there was almost no opponent. The people who formed the Peacock Battle Matrix were all seniors from some sect. In the Zheng dynasty, there had never been such a peerless existence of Renhuang. Many people couldn't figure it out. Was there anyone more powerful than the Ren Huang of the Night Net Palace? At the top of the sky, many top leaders of the overlords looked down at the battle, and their hearts were not calm. At this moment, Li Yuan, the Emperor of the Proud North, looked at the peacock battle matrix with a pair of majestic eyes. He secretly transmitted his voice to Li Yaqi, the seventh prince. Do you all know them? He naturally knew the details of the Ren Huang in the peacock battle matrix. Each of them was talented and the most outstanding of the younger generation from all over the 4 regions of the continent. Each of them came from a famous sect, and many of them had the blood of imperial families. Moreover, they had been trained in martial arts by the Divine Palace. Today's battle had indeed opened Li Yuan's eyes, and he became more curious and yearning for the Divine Palace. This, Li Yaqi murmured, I know a few, but in fact, most of them are still unknown. He wasn't lying. The 7 peaks of the Divine Palace preached separately and didn't allow the disciples to communicate privately. If it weren't for the evil spirits, it would be difficult for them to have a chance to communicate in this lifetime. Then find time to get to know them all. Li Yuan laughed and scolded, and at the same time, he sighed in his heart. He was getting old. The future of the divine wilderness continent would be dominated by this peacock. Today, anyone in the peacock battle matrix would have the qualifications and ability to dominate a part of the world in the future. Li Yaqi didn't come from a good family and didn't have the support of his mother's family, so he needed to maintain a relationship with this group of people. I know. Li Yaqi's eyes were a little sore. After so many twists and turns, he once swore to kill Qin Hao, but the 2 of them had buried the hatchet. 3 years of cultivation in the Divine Palace had changed many of his views. The moment the 7 peak masters were refined by the evil spirits, he also knew that there was something more precious in the world than cultivation. In fact, his father had never ignored him or looked down on him. It was just that they used different methods to train him and his brothers. Second brother. The 4th Prince Li Yajin secretly used his arm to nudge the 2nd Prince Li Yaxu. The old man seemed to have whispered something to his 7th brother. He was most likely worried that they would suppress his 7th brother. Although his mother was born a servant, she was far less outstanding than our mother. But the blood in his body comes from the same source as ours, so keep it in check in the future. The 2nd Prince Li Yaxu could naturally guess what his father was thinking. Even if he didn't say it, he knew. But his father was worrying too much. He and Li Yajin had never thought of murdering his 7th brother. They hadn't before, and in the future he didn't know. But now Li Yaxu only knew one thing. The Southern Pride's time had come, and the Northern Pride's time to unify the proud God Empire had come. Chapter 1582. Proud South and Proud North were originally one entity. A long time ago, the southern region was in turmoil. Warlords ruled over each other, and the flames of war were everywhere. The Ning clan came out of the forest and formed an alliance to build the Ning Wu Empire. Of course, there were also other heroes who came out of nowhere to suppress the chaos. The Li clan and the Xianyuan clan rose to prominence during that time. The ancestors of the Li clan and the Xianyuan clan were a pair of life and death friends. They swept through the chaos and built the proud God Empire. At that time, the proud God Empire was the true #1 empire in the southern region. Even Ning Wu paled in comparison. The ancestors of the 2 clans were very close. Later, it was decided that the Li clan would be the emperor of the proud God Empire. The Xianyuan clan's ancestor was willing to assist his close friend. It was clear that the ancestors of the first generation of the Xianyuan clan were broad-minded. But good times didn't last long. After the ancestors of the 2 clans withered, the relationship between the 2 clans was no longer as good as before. The descendants of the Xianyuan clan had always been dissatisfied. The 2 ancestors had built the empire, so why should they respect the Li clan as emperor? As time passed, his dissatisfaction grew stronger and stronger. In the end, the relationship between the two clans broke down and a battle broke out. Although no one died in the battle, and it was only a dispute caused by the younger generation, it led to the collapse of the proud God Empire. It was split into two, the proud North and the proud South. The Li clan's method was very generous. They cut off half of the empire and gave it to the Xianyuan clan, allowing them to establish themselves as emperors and rule over the endless territories. Although the Li clan's elders approved of the method, they were reluctant. They didn't want a war to break out because of the Xianyuan clan's strength. They didn't want a situation where both sides suffered and the proud God Empire would fall from its pedestal. Therefore, they had to do this as an apology to the Xianyuan clan's ancestor. In their hearts, the Xianyuan clan's ancestor was a great hero. However, the descendants of the Xianyuan clan stirred up trouble and forced the Li clan to cut off half of their territory. Since then, the proud South and the proud North had formed the current situation. Although they didn't like each other, they always had the ambition to conquer each other, hoping to restore the glory of the proud God Empire. At this time, the Li clan's clansmen saw the South's emperor army suffer heavy losses. In this battle, not only were many of the sect's rogue cultivators crushed, even the sect's direct descendants suffered a heavy blow. For the Xianyuan family, the collapse of the four battle formations had truly damaged their vitality. Without 1,000 years, Nan Ao would definitely not be able to recover. On the other hand, the Li family's muscles and bones hadn't moved, their battle personnel orderly and in their peak condition. How could they not have any thoughts? Boom! The cultivators of the blazing Sun Temple stepped into the void sky at the same time. They saw that the army of the southern Ao Renhuang was severely damaged, and the vitality of the Xianyuan clan was obviously damaged. Balls of holy fire began to burn fiercely, and the entire void sky was suppressed with a fighting will. Given the current situation, if he still did not make a move, the Xianyuan family would really be crushed by the Jing family. "It's better if you don't move." A voice as sharp as a sword rang out. Makamanji's long hair fluttered in the wind, and his eyes were fixed on the sun god. At that moment, the cultivators of the Sword clan stepped forward at the same time. Waves of sword will raged, threatening the people from the sage hall. The sun god's face was calm, and there was only one expression on his face. Even though he knew that the Xianyuan family had suffered the most serious injury in history, and that their foundation had been damaged, his heart still did not waver. Only when he looked into Mu Yunzong's eyes did one see some emotional fluctuations in his golden eyes. Humph! Xianyuan Gaoyan snorted heavily, and his eyes moved to Makamanji. The Sword clan's battle formation made it clear that they wanted to restrain the cultivators of the Sage Hall here and not give them a chance to intervene. Makamanji was a vicious schemer. At that moment, Xianyuan Gaoyan's aura was already hidden with murderous intent, but what worried him more was the situation in the city. Everyone could see that Nan Ao's vitality was damaged. As the emperor, he knew how bad the consequences would be when so many Renhuang had fallen. But Xianyuan Gaoyan did not panic. He was very determined. He believed that even if the people of his family were defeated, the Zheng family would not be able to have the last laugh. The protective matrix of the clan? Makamanji glanced at Xianyuan Gaoyan. From his aura, he could feel the murderous intent emanating from him. The Sword clan's actions today had crossed the bottom line of Emperor Xianyuan. However, the Muyin clan did not care. On the contrary, he was now a little worried. It was said that the protective matrix of the Xianyuan family was a combination of attack and defense. It had the power of an emperor. Could Qin Hao and the others really withstand it? Looking at the Jing family's void worship, the Muyin clan shook his head secretly. What did he have to worry about? Buzz. In the sky, the peacock battle matrix flew out of the blizzard, and the rock battle matrix behind it collapsed. However, the situation of Qin Hao and the others was not optimistic. The 300 disciples of the Divine Palace were all bleeding from the corners of their mouths. Their faces were pale, and their auras were unstable. As the seven-colored matrix light slowly dissipated, the huge peacock battle form suddenly disappeared, revealing the figures of everyone. "We are unable to maintain the battle matrix. Be careful," Qin Hao reminded them. After killing the 4 Renhuang battle matrices, his junior brothers had suffered heavy losses. But in any case, they had also disintegrated the Renhuang forces of the Xianyuan family and dealt a heavy blow. As for the last battle matrix of the independent cultivators, it was restrained by the Renhuang of the Night Net Palace and the Zheng family. It could not affect the overall situation at all. "Senior brother, you must be careful," everyone replied. The battle matrix had been dispelled. Next, the 300 people would break up and enter the battle in the city to kill the enemy Renhuang who were severely injured. Although they were severely injured, the power of the Renhuang was still terrifying. They could not give them a chance to turn the situation around and affect the low-level warriors in the battle. Let's go." Qin Hao nodded. Stepping on the 7-colored demon sparrow, he swept down diagonally. Like a blood-red cloud of fire, he pressed into the city. Wherever he passed, no Renhuang could stand in his way. Qin Hao chased after Xianyuan Wuying's aura at an unparalleled speed. Kill! Thunder Flood Dragon flashed around the great path. The figures of the disciples of the Divine Palace frequently entered the city from the sky. They either fought alone or in groups of 3 or 5. When they encountered the injured Renhuang of the Xianyuan family, they killed them without mercy. Chapter 1583. Fierce battles could be seen everywhere in the vast and endless imperial city. Although the Golden Dragon battle matrix and the Rock battle matrix were destroyed, most of the power of the Wei was offset by the power of the battle matrix. A large number of Renhuangs were injured and fell into the city. At this moment, Renhuangs whose bodies were frozen continued to fall. High up in the sky, the disciples of the Divine Palace chased after them. Dense spells turned into layers of flowing light that fell from the sky. Countless Renhuangs of the southern Ao kingdom were hit and perished. Crackling lightning flashed. The Thunder Jiao was wrapped in the power of the great path of thunder. It took a step forward and traversed the space. Its fist blasted out forcefully. Endless power of thunder intertwined and spewed out, engulfing the 3 injured Renhuangs of Xianyuan in front of it. At this moment, the majestic thunder power wrapped around the bodies of the enemies and struck into their spiritual souls. They had no chance to resist. Thunder flashed, and they were directly struck into nothingness. Not far from the Thunder Flood Dragon, Sea Sand revealed his true form. He turned into a giant golden ape that was dozens of feet long. The ape's body was burly and majestic, full of great power. When he stepped into the city, countless palaces collapsed, and the earth shook. Roar! Sea Sand stretched out his palm, an endless spiritual chi of the great path gathered under his palm, condensing into a long staff. He swept out with the staff, and the sky was filled with staff shadows, covering an area of nearly 1,000 miles. When his long staff struck down, all the staff shadows in the sky struck at the same time. The power was like the end of the world, overbearing and boundless. At this moment, several Renhuangs of the direct line of Xianyuan stepped forward. Even though they were seriously injured and knew that they could not resist, they still attacked without fear. The light of Renhuang was released, and at the same time, a palm slammed into the air. Under the palm, the gravity rolled back into the sky. They wanted to hold up the world and not allow Su Haisha to desecrate the sacred city. However, the staff shadows all over the sky fell, and the light of gravity was extinguished. The staff shadows hit the heads of several people, and suddenly, the bodies of these Renhuangs who attacked were smashed into pieces. The attacks of the disciples of Mizang Palace were fierce. After being trained by the Divine Palace, Sea Sand's physical strength exceeded the limit of Renhuang in the outside world. Relying on the power of the battle matrix and the blood of the Xianyuan family, they formed a very strong force. But in a one-on-one fight, no one could stop the disciples of the Divine Palace, especially Sand, who came from Mizar Palace and was the direct disciple of Mizar Peak. This strike not only killed a few Renhuangs with serious injuries, but it also turned the area within a radius of thousands of miles into a pitch-black pit. The earth veins were broken, and not a single blade of grass was left. Turning around, Sand's huge ape body carried a long staff, stomping the ground and shaking the mountains, and rushed towards another battle group. Kill! In the Imperial City, the members of the Xianyuan clan were also in a frenzy. Among them, 2 cultivators at the pinnacle of the Renhuang Plain were luckier. They actually ran into the disciples of Taiwei Peak. Immediately, their soul power raged. The great path's gravity bound the space and crushed towards the disciples of Taiwei Peak, who were exhausted. Rumble! The space trembled as if it was about to collapse. A terrifying gravitational light wave that could be seen with the naked eye instantly enveloped the disciples of the Supreme Way Peak. The gravitational force pressed heavily on their bodies. I told you to follow me closely, but you insisted on being stubborn. One of the disciples of Taiwei Peak roared angrily at the other. They were pharmacists, and they had not comprehended rules. They only relied on the medicinal properties of their primordial spirit. How could they compete with the Renhuangs of the Xianyuan clan, who were good at attacking? Originally, they should have been with their fellow disciples from the other peak. But now they were separated from each other. The soul light around the other person flickered. The medicinal light wrapped around his body. He struggled to hold on, and cold sweat kept flowing from his forehead. It was too late to say anything now. Before the battle, Muri had warned them to be careful so as not to fail miserably. In the end, they failed miserably. They were simply unlucky. Creak! The great path's gravity pressed down, and layers of dim light continued to seep into the medicinal light. The 2 of them groaned and finally could not hold on any longer. It was as if they were crushed by a mountain, and they fell heavily to the ground. At this moment, their internal organs were almost crushed. Die! When the 2 Renhuangs who attacked saw this, their skinny palms pressed down at the same time, wanting to kill the 2 disciples of Taiwei Peak on the spot. Whoosh! At this time, a sharp halberd light slashed down, cutting the gravity light wave and shattering it. The 2 old men were shocked. They looked up and saw a tall and handsome young man jump down like a god of war. The heavenly halberd in his hand shone with a dazzling light. He slashed out a terrifying half-moon light. With a poochie sound, the halberd slashed through the 2 old men's waists. What a ruthless young man! One of them spoke. Then, they all fell to the ground dead. Mizar Palace's Qin Yun. Many thanks, Senior Brother Qin. The 2 Taiwei Peak disciples who had narrowly escaped death crawled up with their faces covered in dust. They were simply grateful to the point of shedding tears. Qin Hao nodded as he swept his gaze across the battlefield. He was constantly searching for Qin Hao. The Imperial City was huge and boundless. With K.'s fast speed, there was no way he could catch up to her. Follow me closely, Qin Yun said to the 2 disciples of Taiwei Peak. Although he knew that Xianyuan Wuying was no match for Qin Hao, he still hoped that he could be safe. Fierce battles took place all over the city. Countless warriors lost their lives in every breath. Even Renhuang warriors were not spared. At this time, somewhere in the Imperial City, a blood-red cloud of fire surrounded by demonic flames sped forward. Qin Hao stood on a skylark. With the great void sword in his hand, a Renhuang powerhouse would fall to the ground with a casual slash. He released his spiritual power and locked onto Xianyuan Wuying's aura. The 2 of them were getting closer and closer. Soon, 3,000 miles, 1,000 miles, 500 miles. When a familiar figure in damaged armor appeared in front of him, the cloud of fire instantly descended. Qin Hao roared. Xianyuan Wuying waved his sword like the sword-drawing technique. A startling sword aura condensed from the red lotus fire pierced through the space and stabbed directly in front of Xianyuan Wuying. Xianyuan Wuying's eyes narrowed to the size of a needle. As an ultimate Renhuang, he had now reached the level of the Music Palace's Grand Elder. He could summon the Imperial Tribulation at any time and form an Imperial body. Due to the power of the 36 calamities of the Great Path, he was not confident that he could successfully overcome them. So, he maintained the state of an ultimate Renhuang. At this level, he was infinitely close to the Imperial realm. His perception was very sharp. In fact, before Qin Hao shouted, he realized that danger was coming. In an instant, Xianyuan Wuying's body burst with a powerful light of gravity. A dark light screen appeared in front of him. On the light screen, the power of rules flowed, and the will of the Great Path was extremely thick. A blood-red sword light pierced through the air and penetrated the light screen. It ignored the Great Path of gravity of the Xianyuan family and severely injured Xianyuan Wuying. Crack! The light screen shattered, and a severed arm was thrown into the air. Xianyuan Wuying's body leaned back. His whole body seemed to be burned by flames. He could not help but let out a scream. Chapter 1584. The sword cut off his arm and narrowly avoided the gate of life. The sword Qi contained the art of endless samsara that could tear apart the rules. Rules under the rules were ineffective. The sword pierced through the gravity defense directly. Xianyuan Wuying showed great pain. The wound on his broken arm flashed with the luster of the red lotus fire. His spiritual soul felt like it was piercing through. He looked at Qin Hao coming at him with the sword. Hatred rose in his heart. But at the same time there was fear in his eyes. He did not expect Qin Hao to be so powerful. Even a peak Renhuang could not withstand his attack. He was not a great emperor, but his sword Qi was comparable to a sword emperor. What kind of lethality was that? Run! While they were hesitating, a middle-aged man descended from the sky and pressed his palm on Xianyuan Wuying's chest. He struck out with his palm, and the vigorous palm power sent Xianyuan Wuying flying into the distance. Then, the middle-aged man who suddenly appeared turned around and charged at Qin Hao. Dazzling golden flames surged around him. Mr. Jingxi. Xianyuan Wuying looked at his opponent and flew backward involuntarily. His body was wrapped in a stream of light as he escaped. Ji Jingxi was an extraordinary person from the southern region. They met by chance and became close friends. Ji Jingxi was also the master who trained Xianyuan Feng in martial art. Seeing Xianyuan Wuying severely injured, he sacrificed himself to stop him. Infinite change of yin and yang. The middle-aged man formed a mudra with his hands. The brilliance of rules flowed around his body. A halo of the great path of yin and yang gathered above his head, absorbing the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. It grew bigger and bigger as if there was a universe inside. He pointed forward. The light of yin and yang fell like the power of the heavens, trying to suppress Qin Hao. Those who stop me will die. Qin Hao was in a frenzy. The red lotus overbearing fire swam around the great void divine sword. He slashed out with the red lotus flaming blade. Boom! The several dozen meter-long flaming blade sliced through the air towards the yin-yang Dao light. For a moment, the sword qi wreaked havoc, and sparks flew everywhere. The yin-yang Dao light burst forth with the power of the stars in the sky, as if it had transformed into a vast starry sky that covered the sky. Endless starlight fell madly, wanting to annihilate the burning heaven-flame sea. However, the intensity of the fire was unparalleled. The more it burned, the more intense it became. The starlight was constantly being melted, and the fire continued to burn. The roar of a dragon's soul could be heard, and the roar shook the divine soul. Even though they were fighting from a distance, the middle-aged man's palms were ignited with 2 balls of blood-red devil flames. He felt as if there was a wild dragon churning inside his divine soul. Ah! A shriek was heard as the middle-aged man's body was instantly engulfed by the will of the fire of the red lotus. The yin-yang light of the way in the air was split apart by the flaming sword aura and was torn into countless shards of light. Mr. Jing Si. In the distance, Xianyuan Wuying saw the tragic scene and was filled with grief. No one can save you. A frenzied figure rushed out of the raging fire wave. Qin Hao's pair of blood-red eyes were particularly frightening. The skylark under his feet let out a high-pitched cry, and it chased after Xianyuan Wuying like an immortal bird. During this process, several renhuangs of the Xianyuan family stepped forward to stop Qin Hao, but they couldn't stop him at all. When the flaming cloud flew all the way, those figures that rushed over were buried in the raging flames like moth. Boom! There was a tremor in the void, and the movement was extremely violent. The aura of Emperor Yuan disappeared in the sound. Qin Hao subconsciously raised his head, only to see an old man wearing the Xianyuan family's uniform rushing over. The Emperor's light raged around him. From a distance, a huge palm print slammed down. This palm contained an extremely terrifying great path gravity. The sky seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. The vast might of the way was released, and countless cultivators in the city were intimidated by it. They were so frightened that they didn't dare to move. This palm was aimed directly at Qin Hao. The defense line of the Emperor Realm was broken. At the same time, the Emperor Realm Elder made his move. Behind him, the body of an elder of the Night Luo Palace was shattered. His spiritual soul turned into a dim beam of light and escaped from the battle, flying toward the Jing clan's flagship. The only thing he could do now was to escape back to Muri's side. He might still be able to protect his spiritual soul. This Night Luo Palace elder tried his best. If it weren't for Qin Hao chasing Xianyuan Wuying too closely and diverting the attention of the Xianyuan family elder, her spiritual soul might not have had the chance to escape. However, with this defeat, the old man pounced straight at Qin Hao. Be careful. Seeing this, great ancestor Jing was shocked. Swoosh. At the same time, the Dihong silk wrapped around great ancestor Zheng's body flew down, like a swimming dragon passing through the void. Its speed was faster than the Xianyuan family elder, as if the Dihong silk had a soul. Qin Hao didn't know if it was an illusion, but the moment he looked up, he seemed to see Zhang Yu's figure. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The majestic emperor palm crushed the heavens. Before it, the Dihong silk wrapped around Qin Hao and Yun Kei's bodies. The emperor weapon flickered with light, and 3 layers of light wrapped tightly around them. It felt as if a pair of arms were protecting them. Boom! The heavy palm of the great path came crashing down like thunder. Boundless rules of gravity surged wildly, and Qin Hao and Kei felt as if their bones were about to shatter. Blood seeped out of their pores uncontrollably. Before the attack landed on their bodies, they were covered in blood by the squall that came crashing down. At this moment, the imperial rainbow sash also burst out with an extremely dazzling radiance. A layer of imperial light went against the momentum and clashed with the imperial palm. The 2 layers of terrifying Tao of rules turned into aftershocks that radiated outward. Looking from the sky, the area hundreds of meters around Qin Hao had completely collapsed, turning into a sunken palm print. Poof! One hit. Qin Hao and Kei were knocked back from midair. This palm had forcefully cut off the path of pursuing Xianyuan Wuying. The fiery clouds were scattered, and 2 bodies tumbled out from the imperial robe's sash. One fell into the distance, and the other crashed into a dilapidated palace. The palace, which was already dilapidated, was reduced to rubble in an instant. Although the Dihong silk had neutralized the old man's rule power, the shock waves that came from it still hit the 2 of them. Screech! Yun Kei fell to the ground, flapping her wings. She struggled for a long time but could not get up. In the ruins of another palace, Qin Hao's body grew larger. His entire body was covered in broken dragon scales, and his body was covered in deep cuts. He shook his head with all his might several times, but he still could not wake up. His ears were ringing madly. Die! The old man from the Xianyuan family opened his eyes wide. He could still sense Qin Hao's aura. That palm strike didn't kill him. Then, the intense rule power gathered in the center of his palm again. He was about to unleash another palm. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, 3 streams of light shot into the sky from outside the city. Each of them was surging with golden-white emperor light. Their bodies were as fast as lightning, and their power was overwhelming. The fastest one was the sword Qi. To the left of the sword Qi was a ball of blood-red light. To the right was the figure of the great empress holding the jade water sword Shadow. Chapter 1585. Showuk rose into the air. Emperor light wrapped around his body, and it was as if a beam of sword Qi had pierced through the void. It was extremely sharp. His right hand formed a sword finger, and he pointed it forward. Surging sword will bloomed from his body, turning into countless beams of sword Dao light. Endless rows of sword lights followed his body and flew forward. From afar, it looked like a huge sword peak was hanging upside down in the sky. It was vast and mighty. It was the 10,000 sword Empyrean. That elder was a 5th-tier monarch Yuan. He was the strongest elder in the Xianyuan family on the surface. His cultivation was extremely domineering. Showuk was a 1st-tier monarch Yuan. He would naturally go all out in this battle. 10,000 swords flew together, and sword Dao rules flashed. The sword peak pierced upwards. Before the sword Qi arrived, the sword will already made the elder's expression change. At this moment, he felt a faint pain on his skin. It was as if the sword will had penetrated his monarch body. What a pure sword will! Even though they were enemies, the elder couldn't help but exclaim in his heart. After seeing Showuk's face clearly, he naturally recognized him. He was from the sword sect, the nephew of the sword emperor Makamanji. However, since he had attacked him, he wouldn't hold back. The heavy palm of the great Dao that he had prepared to attack Qin Hao suddenly changed its direction and pressed down on Showuk's head. The sword sect and the Zheng clan were the mortal enemies of the Xianyuan family. They should be killed. Boom! The heavy palm of the great Dao fell, and brilliant rules enveloped the entire space. The sky shook violently as if it was collapsing. It crushed down on the 10,000 sword Empyrean. At this moment, the sword peak shattered. Countless sword Qi currents collapsed within the palm Qi. Sword lights were constantly crushed and shattered. Showuk furrowed his brows, and a majestic sword Qi burst forth for the second time. The Daozong Peak's monarch technique, Empress Wa's Holy Spirit mantra, was unleashed. The Emperor's light around his body completely solidified. Even though his arms were trembling, his sword fingers were extremely tough. Sword Qi continuously flew out from his fingertips and merged back into the 10,000 swords celestial peak. Boundless sword will and sword Qi were boundless. At this moment, Showuk's sword Qi became even sharper. A series of ding-ding-dang-dang sounds could be heard as the sword Qi collided with the palm print. Finally, with a poochie sound, the sword Qi pierced through the palm print. More and more holes appeared on the palm print, turning into countless holes. The sword Qi pierced through the palm print and flew towards the old man. Bang! A powerful and heavy blow, along with countless holes in the terrifying palm print, still blasted onto Showuk's body. He was born with the ability to pierce through rules of the sword, but he was unable to tear the palm print apart. He could only pierce through it with his sword aura. A mouthful of blood spurted out crazily. The palm print pressed down on Showuk and fell into the city, causing countless buildings to collapse. However, the old man's face was equally shocked. He was a 5th firmament Yuan arch, yet he was pierced through by Showuk's sword. What kind of sharp sword intent was this? In the next second, what entered the old man's eyes was tens of thousands of sword Qi currents flying over, burying him in the sword light. Break for me. The old man finally realized the danger. The emperor light around his body raged violently, wanting to block the sword chi from reaching him. Just as he moved, a huge blood mist suddenly appeared in front of him, and an incomparably smelly blood light swept him into it. The old man fell into the blood mist, and the blood in his body flowed in reverse. He couldn't control it at all, and it overflowed out of his body. It even accelerated the aging of his internal organs. He was horrified to discover that his Dharch body was withering and aging. "You dog slave, how dare you hurt my master? Old demon, I will fight you to the death." The old demon bared his teeth and glared. On his head, a green hat emitted a strange radiance of laws, crazily surging towards the blood mist that surrounded the old man. As the blood emperor of Western Liang in his previous life, the old demon comprehended the laws to control the flow of the enemy's blood and accelerate the aging of the Dharch body. If it wasn't for the old man's cultivation being so much higher than his, he would have died of old age. In these 3 years, the old demon desperately dual cultivated with Yininghong, and only then did he return to his peak and step into the second firmament Dharch realm again. Ah! The old man's hoarse howl sounded in the void. The pain of having his bloodline reversed by the enemy's laws in a fierce battle was unimaginable. At this moment, not only was he enduring the invasion of the old demon's laws, but his body was also forcibly distorted. His essence chi was in chaos, and his meridians were exploding one by one. At this moment, Showuk's 10,000 sword heavenly peak pierced into the blood mist. Terrifying sword lights flashed, carrying terrifying piercing laws, piercing into the old man's weak body and into his divine soul, piercing countless holes in his divine soul, causing him to suffer fatal injuries. Boom! A thunderous explosion spread out, shaking heaven and earth. The surging Tao might scattered the old demon's laws, and the blood mist was evaporated in one strike. "Damn you, you actually self-destructed." The old demon stretched his neck, and like a rooster crowing, he spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes rolled back, and he fell from the sky. The self-destruction of a fifth firmament Dharch was ferocious. The old man knew that he couldn't escape this calamity, so he used the self-destruction method to severely injure the old demon. Even if his Dharch body was destroyed, he had to drag the Jing dynasty's Emperor Yuan down with him. It had to be said that the old demon was also very unlucky. Swoosh! A broken divine soul beam flew out from the aftermath, straight into the sky, and fled towards the top of the sky. Xianyuan Gaoyan was there. The old man's Dharch body was destroyed, and his divine soul was also severely injured. He needed to hurry back to Xianyuan Gaoyan's side and use the power of the Dharch realm to protect his life. Die. But how could Xiao Han let the old man do as he wished? In this battle, Showuk, and the old demon had been conserving their strength. They were waiting for this moment to surprise and kill Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family, reversing the battle between the thearchs. The sacred crown appeared, filled with endless light, radiating the entire sky, turning into a divine light cage that suppressed everything. Xiao Han's body was like a graceful swan. The jade water sword in her hand quickly pierced towards the old man's remnant soul. This sword wasn't the jade water sword from before. It was the sword that Qin Hao received from Li Wanji in the hidden dragon mystic realm. It was the sword of Empress Xiantian, a ninth forged Dharch artifact. Empress Xiantian was the celestial lord Xiantian of the divine palace. This sword was a relic of the celestial lord Xiantian. After everyone returned from the divine palace, Qin Hao handed this sword to Xiao Han. The divine light of the crown turned into a prison that sealed the void, and a majestic empress appeared. Her terrifying spiritual light shone on the old man's remnant soul. The old man's remnant soul was suppressed by Xiao Han's spiritual force, and he screamed in horror. Pucci! Immediately afterward, a jade water sword pierced into the ethereal remnant soul, and an even more surging spiritual Tao intent invaded it. With the help of the sword of Xiantian Peak, Xiao Han directly tore the old man's remnant soul into pieces. Imperial sword, no! An angry and unwilling roar resounded through the world. An Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family had fallen. The second Emperor Yuan. In the distant void, countless southern region cultivators who were watching the battle were shocked. As the fierce battle passed, Emperor Yuan had already begun to die. First, an elder of the Night Luo Palace had his large body shattered. Then, the situation changed, and the strongest elder of the Xianyuan family was also killed. He was directly killed, and his divine soul was destroyed. In contrast, the death of the old man was even more shocking. After all, this Emperor Yuan was killed by the joint efforts of 3 inferior essence Qi cultivators. The weak defeated the strong. Makamanji, isn't the sword sect only here to enjoy the scenery? Great anger suddenly appeared on Sun God's face, and golden light burst out from his eyes like 2 burning divine flames. In an instant, the dozen or so lava giants at the top of the sky let out roars as if they had gone mad, venting their anger on behalf of their master. The sword sect is here to enjoy the scenery, but Wuk's current position is not that of the sword sect. Makamanji rubbed his nose and said, Showuk's identity was that of a disciple of the Divine Palace, the same as Qin Hao. The void was quiet. The silence was terrifying, revealing infinite oppression. Sun God stared coldly at Makamanji. In order to avoid fighting with the other party, he could endure and not participate in this battle, provided that the sword sect also did not intervene. But Makamanji lied to him. Kill. An extremely cold order came out of Sun God's mouth. Boom, 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 boom. Countless balls of flames from the holy temple flew down from the void. Within each ball of flames was a holy temple expert. These beams of flames with powerful auras fell towards the battle in the city, like a sea of fire falling from the sky. Chapter 1586. The sea of fire shrouded the sky and poured into the city. The scene was spectacular. I've long heard that the sacred hall's fire spells are profound. Today, I'm fortunate enough to meet them. Go and experience it. Makamanji instructed. Above the sky, all the cultivators of the Sword Clan moved, including Elder Meng. Beams of sword light fell from the sky and flew towards the figures in the sea of fire to intercept them. Every beam of sword light that came into contact with them blocked a cultivator of the Sage Halls. Suddenly, countless sword lights in the sky weaved into a vast sword net. The sword sect's sword aura connected and shrouded the imperial city, forcibly blocking the sea of fire. In an instant, the experts from both sides fought. This scene made the Zhan Wu spectators of the southern region sigh. 2 more overlord-level forces were in a battle. The Sacred Hall wanted to help Nan Ao reverse the situation, but the Sword Sect didn't let them and block them. Since when did the Zheng clan have such a close relationship with the Sword Sect? Most people didn't know the reason. Only the martial artists who had been to the Golden Light City auction house could guess that the Sword Sect might have made a move for Qin Hao. At this moment, Emperor Yuan's subordinates were fighting. Sword aura and flames crisscrossed in the sky. Sun God and the Sword Dharch still didn't move. Although Sun God's face was filled with anger, he still tried his best to restrain himself. He didn't want to become enemies with Makamanji. However, the Sacred Hall was restrained by the Sword Sect and couldn't come to their aid. This made Xianyuan Gaoyan anxious. The 8-winged black dragon was restless, releasing a tyrannical dragon aura. Emperor Xianyuan took a step forward and was about to make a move. Buzz. Yininghong also took a step forward. The demonic Oriole chirped and stared at the other party. If Xianyuan Gaoyan made a move, she would definitely fight him. Wooing, retreat to the Divine Hall. Xianyuan Gaoyan secretly clenched his fists. He looked at Yininghong with eyes full of killing intent and shouted towards the sky below. The strongest elder in the clan was killed. Nan Ao couldn't gain the upper hand in the battle between the Thearch. It was completely imaginable what Xiao Han and Shou Wuk would do next. They would definitely help the Thearchs on the battlefield and expand Knight Luo Palace's advantage. As a result, Emperor Yuan was even more unable to do anything. He was trapped both internally and externally. Qin Hao chased after him like a madman. His progress in cultivation was astonishing. If Xianyuan Wuying wanted to survive, the only way to survive was to hide in the Divine Temple and enter the core of the protective formation. Inside the city, after Xiao Han killed the old man's remnant soul, she glanced in the direction of Qin Hao. She saw a tall figure coming out of the ruins aggressively. Surrounded by blood-red devil flames, he raised his sword and rushed toward Xianyuan Wuying. Even though she wanted to go over and fight with him, Xiao Han knew in her heart that it was a duel between men. It was not convenient for her to intervene. Otherwise, he would be belittling Qin Hao's self-esteem. Turning around, Xiao Han flew up into the sky like a graceful swan. A graceful sword light slashed toward Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family. Her mission now was to help Knight Luo Palace reverse their disadvantage in the Thearchs. Spit! Qin Hao spat out a stone and finally regained his consciousness. His scarlet eyes stared at Xianyuan Wuying again. His huge spiritual power locked onto his opponent. The water-wind god took a step forward and swept through the air like a gust of wind. It was as fast as a rainbow as it headed straight for the target. Go and protect Keir, Ahei, Huang, and Jiuing. Kill Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family. The interspatial ring flickered, and 4 extremely violent auras drilled out. The dog spirit flapped its wings and landed in Qiao Er's position. Even though she had the protection of the Imperial Rainbow Ribbon, her physical body wasn't as strong as Qin Hao's, and her injuries weren't light. The Centaur brothers held the purple-gold thunder hammers in their hands. When the hammers collided, the sound waves of the great Tao vibrated. Thunder flash wrapped around the hammers as they stepped on Jiu Ying's broad back and went straight to the weakest elder of the Xianyuan family. Jiu Ying was the beast emperor of the Internal Sea, and Ahei Huang was also an extreme human sovereign. Although they hadn't transcended the Tharch tribulation, their resistance was extremely strong. In fact, their offensive power was definitely not weaker than that of a lower-level Emperor Yuan. With them and Xiao Han in the Battle of the Thearchs, the Southern Ao Thearchs would usher in the end. At this time, Qin Hao only had Xianyuan Wuying in his eyes. Wherever he hid, he would chase. He had to kill this person. Xianyuan Wuying saw Qin Hao rushing over again. He didn't die after being hit by Emperor Yuan, and his speed was superb. Even though his body was covered in blood, his eyes were as fierce and terrifying as a demon. At this time, Xianyuan Gaoyan's shout sounded above his head. He didn't dare to hesitate any longer and turned around to fly towards the temple. The battlefield was chaotic, and the aura of the strong was dense. The space of the great Tao was unstable, and it was impossible to tear through space to teleport. He could only desperately fly away from Qin Hao, that monster. Xianyuan Wuying probably never thought that one day he would be in such a sorry state. The dignified second prince of Southern Ao was being chased by a junior, and he had no way to deal with the other party. 2 streams of light, one in front and one behind, chased crazily. The warriors they encountered on the way were all shocked to death by the vital qi of the two. In contrast, Qin Hao's speed was even crazier, and the distance between him and Xianyuan Wuying was constantly shortening. Before the other party hid in the temple, it was very likely that he would be caught. However, this wasn't the only scene on the vast battlefield. In another area, there were also 2 figures chasing crazily, one in front and one behind. The suffocating sense of crisis was not inferior to that of Qin Hao and Xianyuan Wuying. It was Su Jin and Chang Helo. At this time, in the Guangbao area on the right side of the temple, Su Jin was flying in the air. The Emperor's light shone on his body, and as he flew, a rhythm of the Great Path came from his body. In front of him, Chang Hello was the fastest to escape. Behind Chang Hello was a large group of high-level members of the Spirit Beast clan. However, the cultivation of the people of the Spirit Beast clan was weak, and their speed was not as fast as Chang Helo's, let alone Su Jin's. The light of the sound technique shrouded the front, and anyone from the Spirit Beast clan who was caught in it was immediately buried in the Alcade sound technique, and not even their spiritual souls remained. In a moment, there were only a few people left behind Chang Hello. "You must die today," Su Jin said. Su Jin spoke while his eyes were suffused with strands of blood, and his tone actually faintly carried the hatred of Su Jin's true body. If it weren't for Chang Hello, Lan Qingwu wouldn't have died, Su Jin himself wouldn't have died, and Gooden wouldn't have lost his physical body and borrowed Su Jin's body to be resurrected and walk the world under another person's name. Everything was just Chang Helua's personal vendetta, causing them to become innocent sacrificial lambs. Chang Helo heard the words coming from behind him, but he didn't respond. He instinctively surged his vital qi and fled to the temple, hiding under the fence of the Xianyuan family. He knew many secrets of the Xianyuan family. The temple was the source of the great matrix protecting the family, and its defensive power was amazing. It was his only hope of survival. The sound waves of the great path swept out, and Su Jin pursued closely. Two flowing lights pierced through the sky, and coincidentally, they ran into Qin Hao, who was chasing after Xianyuan Wuying. In an instant, the four of them gathered together. Chapter 1587. Chang Hello and Xianyuan Wuying were both extremely fast. They flew towards the center, one on the left and one on the right. They almost collided into each other. Fortunately, they turned around quickly and began to move forward side by side. At this moment, the two of them subconsciously looked at each other. Their eyes met, and the same bitterness arose in their hearts. It was really the end of the world. They were forced into such a situation. Behind them, Qin Hao and Su Jin had also gathered together. However, in comparison, Qin Hao's speed was much faster than Su Jin's. The water-wind god's steps were extremely fast, instantly widening the distance between them and the two who were fleeing in front of them. "Do you think you can escape?" Qin Hao's left hand smashed forward. The power of the art of endless samsara swept out and covered the top of Xianyuan Wuying and Chang Helo's heads. An invisible force sealed the space and blocked their way forward. Xianyuan Wuying was shocked. He felt that the space around him began to solidify. It was like a cage. In this situation, there was no escape. His gaze fell on Chang Helo. Xianyuan Wuying's eyes flashed. His right hand suddenly pressed forward and clasped onto Chang Helo's shoulder. The yuan qi in his body was raging. An extremely powerful force gathered in the palm of his hand. Chang Helo felt his shoulder sink. An external force surged. His body began to lose control. He suddenly turned his head. When he saw Xianyuan Wuying's eyes, he immediately guessed what he was going to do. He was preparing to use him as a shield and abandon him. Humph! Chang Helo snorted coldly. He turned around and slammed his palm on Xianyuan Wuying's chest. Now, he was no longer the Chang Helo of the past. He had enough strength to walk the path he had chosen. He didn't need to care about Xianyuan Wuying's attitude, nor did he need to be manipulated by him. Bang! This palm hit Xianyuan Wuying heavily. The turbulent rules and Tao intent penetrated his body, shattering his bones and shaking his organs. Xianyuan Wuying, who had been severely injured, spat a mouthful of blood on Chang Helo's face. He looked surprised. Although he was a little surprised, Xianyuan Wuying was not too surprised. According to Chang Helo's character, this counterattack was within his expectations. However, Xianyuan Wuying's hand on Chang Helo's shoulder didn't relax at all. Instead, he gathered more and more strength without holding back. Then, he grabbed Chang Helo's body and threw him forward with all his might. He said, "Live." Whoosh! Chang Helou's body was wrapped in the bright light of Renhuang. This power almost sucked out all of Xianyuan Wuyong's vitality. Like a shooting star, he shuttled out of the solid space in an instant. Chang Helou was stunned. He turned back to look at Xianyuan Wuying. The face that had disgusted him was becoming more and more blurry and unfamiliar. Why? He asked his heart. Why did he save him instead of abandoning him? Why? At this moment, Xianyuan Wuying was also asking himself. He obviously wanted to grab Chang Helou and throw him at Qin Hao. However, when he saw Chang Geluo's eyes, apart from anger, there was also a trace of panic. He looked like a frightened child. This look was very similar to Xianyuan Feng's when he was dying. Anger towards Qin Hao. Panic, fear of death. Presumably, before Feng died, he also called for his father to save him from the bottom of his heart. Buzz. Space was frozen. The power of the domain shrouded down and separated Xianyuan Wuying and Chang Helou. These two people also ushered in different endings. You want to kill me? It's not that easy. Xianyuan Wuying turned around. His weak body unbelievably burst into a mass of vast light. He raised his remaining arm above his head. The Renhuang spiritual soul followed the vast light and soared into the 9 heavens. It seemed to merge with the great path of heaven and earth. Boom! Crack! Above this part of the world, thunderclouds appeared out of thin air. A ray of light of catastrophe of the great path flashed. The light became more and more terrifying, and the might of the way was oppressive. Imperial catastrophe. Qin Hao suddenly stopped and looked up. Xianyuan Wuying had summoned the imperial catastrophe. Did he want to use the imperial catastrophe to block it so that Chang Helou could escape smoothly? Buzz. The sound of a flute flowed and spread. The notes swept in all directions and became more and more intense. Su Jin's soul flute was placed under his lips. The imperial light around him was dazzling. Back then, he could take away Yu Luxin's catastrophe. Today, he could also kill Xianyuan Wuying. No need. Qin Hao turned around and said. After that, he stepped forward step by step. The great void sword in his hand was covered with a thick layer of bloody light. It was as if blood was about to drip out. The red lotus fire around him burned more and more violently. Whether Xianyuan Wuying wanted to pass the catastrophe to become an emperor or use the imperial catastrophe to block him, it was just wishful thinking. Boom! Crack! The clouds of catastrophe moved extremely fast. At the top of the sky, the millstone of the great path formed was rolling. A ray of terrifying light of catastrophe struck down from the sky to the ground. It blasted towards Xianyuan Wuying and swallowed his entire body. Ah! Xianyuan Wuying was hit by the first ray of catastrophe. He let out an extremely tragic cry. When he was in his prime, he did not have the confidence to pass the imperial catastrophe. Now, how could he withstand it with this broken body? Boom! The first ray of catastrophe fell. Immediately, the second ray of catastrophe struck down and hit Xianyuan Wuying again. The might of the great path that drowned him was even more terrifying. At this moment, Xianyuan Wuying felt as if his soul had flown out of his body. He was going to be buried in the light of catastrophe and torn to pieces by the great path. Rays of catastrophe struck down continuously. There were 36 tribulations of the great path. Every time one of them fell, Xianyuan Wuying would spit out a mouthful of blood. It was as if he had spat out his internal organs. His broken body became more and more broken. His aura seemed to be turning into nothingness. If he could not withstand it, it was obvious that he had no chance of passing the catastrophe to become an emperor. But this was also good. Dying in the imperial catastrophe was better than dying in the hands of Qin Hao. At the very least, Chang Helou had survived. His body was broken little by little. The spiritual aura that had merged with the great path seemed to be torn apart. Xianyuan Wuying, who was trapped in the light of catastrophe, was about to reach the end of his life. Death? You can only die in my hands. Qin Hao's eyes were bleeding. His footsteps rumbled. His dragonized body was extremely majestic. He ignored the catastrophe of the Great Path and rushed directly into the light of catastrophe with his sword. Seeing this scene, Su Jin's heart trembled. Although the disciples of the Divine Palace had been tempered and their spiritual souls and bodies were far stronger than those of the Runhuang outside, when he seized the heart of music's imperial catastrophe, he released the rules of the Great Path in advance to protect himself. But Qin Hao was like a madman. Without any preparation, he directly charged in. What a... Su Jin could not describe it. The blood-colored long sword pierced into the light of catastrophe. The power of the Great Path in the sky smashed into Qin Hao's back. Even in his dragonized state, the soles of his feet were still a little weak. But immediately Qin Hao stood firm. He stared at the broken body in the light of catastrophe and stabbed forward. With a crack, it penetrated Xianyuan Wuying's heart. At this moment, Qin Hao was like a madman. He bore the imperial catastrophe of the Great Path and directly stabbed Xianyuan Wuying with his sword. Between his palms, he accurately nailed Xianyuan Wuying's heart. Bang, bang, bang. Along the way, countless palaces were destroyed. Everywhere the two of them passed was turned into ruins. Finally, Qin Hao stopped. His body was still wrapped in the light of the imperial catastrophe. He stood in midair and looked coldly ahead. He saw that in front of him, there was an ancient tower. Xianyuan Wuying's body was pressed against it. His head was lowered. Streaks of blood flowed down his messy hair. His chest was penetrated by a blood-colored long sword. It was as if he was hanging from the ancient tower. There was endless desolation. There was no longer any trace of life. His spiritual soul was torn apart by the sword will. The second prince of Nan Ao had fallen. Qin Hao glared at Xianyuan Wuying's body. Even though he had successfully killed him, the hatred in his heart did not lessen. If the two armies were not fighting at this moment, and Xianyuan Gaoyan was watching from the top of the sky, he would never have let Xianyuan Wuying die so easily. This sword was too easy for him. Wuying. In the void, Xianyuan Wuba sensed that Xianyuan Wuying's aura had disappeared. His heart suddenly turned cold. It was as if the line that connected the two brothers had been broken. When he looked down at the battlefield, he happened to see Xianyuan Wuying's chest pierced by a sword and nailed to the top of the most eye-catching ancient tower in the imperial city. At this moment, Xianyuan Wuba's mind exploded. His eyes immediately turned red. He opened his mouth, but he could not make any sound. It was as if the memories of his childhood were just yesterday. Qin Hao, I will kill you! A bestial roar resounded through the world. It was as if a person was being skinned. It was so painful. He turned around and punched old ancestor Jing's face. He no longer cared about this old thing that could not be killed. The emperor light that Xianyuan Wuba emitted was majestic to the extreme. His sixth-layer Yuan Emperor cultivation shattered the void. He ignored the many Yuan emperors who were fighting around him and tore the space apart. His fierce aura was directly above Qin Hao's head. Poof! In an instant, the soul power surged and the space shook violently. Whether it was the elders of the Night Luo Palace, the elders of the Xianyuan family branch, Shaohan or Jiuing, they were all caught off guard. They vomited blood from Xianyuan Wuba's berserk emperor aura. However, at the same time, in the southwest direction of the imperial city, an extremely terrifying emperor light tore the space apart. It was like a beam of sword aura that tore the world apart. Its pressure was even stronger than Xianyuan Wuba's. There was a loud rumble. The two emperor lights collided across the sky. Heaven and earth shook, and many palaces in the city were uprooted uncontrollably. They rose into the sky and instantly collapsed into powder. At this moment, not far from Qin Hao, two figures were facing each other across the sky. Who is it? Xianyuan Wuba was surprisingly calm. His domineering eyes were staring at the figure opposite him with rolling pressure. It was as if Qin Hao had nothing to do with him at this moment. Dan Ji's subordinate, slaying the clan and slaying Wenjia. A domineering middle-aged man with a sharp face and a blade in his hand replied in a deep voice. His voice was powerful. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Countless streams of light shot over from the same direction as the domineering middle-aged man. They were like beams of sharp sword aura. Southern region's slaying sect, participating in the battle. Zhang Ye's voice spread and entered Qin Hao's ears. Chapter 1588. The Zhan clan was the clan of Zhan Lang, one of the 4 divine generals under Dendi in Daqin. After Dendi fell, the Zhan clan escaped from Daqin and wandered in the southern region. They changed their name to Zhan sect and hid in a mysterious place. No one could find the entrance to the place. In the southern region, there had been some rumors about Zhan sect. The warriors in the southern region didn't know much about it. They only knew that Zhan sect's saber techniques were peerless, and they had many masters. They were as strong as a first-rate sect. After returning from the inland sea, Zhang Yi left the group and returned to Zhan sect alone to bring back this lost tribe for Qin Hao. Strictly speaking, this was a member of Qin Hao's direct line of descent. But the journey was not easy. There was a terrible saber matrix outside the sect. No matter who it was, if they wanted to come back after leaving the sect, they had to go through the saber matrix. This was a rule set by the clan. The saber matrix was unpredictable. Every time it was invaded, the attack of the matrix was different. It was difficult for those who were not brave and powerful to break through. Only the Renhuang level masters in the clan were qualified to enter and leave. The weaker members had almost no possibility of leaving the clan. This was also to make it easier to protect the young people in the clan. After cultivating in the Divine Palace for 3 years, Zhang Yi had entered the half-step Saber Emperor realm. However, the Saber Matrix was stronger than the opponent. He spent a lot of energy and fought until he was covered in wounds. Only then did he pass the test and return to the clan. Then, he told his father what had happened. The father and son rushed into the place where the Zhan sect patriarch was cultivating in seclusion and woke him up. The whole clan rushed here without stopping. Time was tight. For Zhang Yi, he had almost no rest. If he was not fighting, he was having an epiphany in the saber matrix. But for the outside world, he went for more than a month and almost missed the battle. Fortunately, he finally made it. The middle-aged man who stopped Xianyuan Wuba was Zhang Ye's father, Zhan Wenjia, a cultivator of the 7th level of the Yuan Emperor realm. At this moment, beams of saber light flew through the air like a large meteor. The light shrouded the sky and blasted into the battle. Those terrifying saber chi with a platinum luster were all saber emperors. They directly slashed toward the elder of the Xianyuan clan. The Renhuang of the Zhan clan rode the saber light into the city. Endless saber chi rushed back and forth, stirring up a terrifying bloody rain wherever it passed. 9 heavens consecutive slashes, die. Zhang Yi roared. He held the door-like tyrant blade in his hand. From a distance, he continuously slashed out. Each slash was stronger than the previous one. 9 beams of blade light broke through the air, tearing the space apart. Finally, they condensed into a terrifying blade light that landed on Emperor Yuan, who was fighting with Xiao Han. Emperor Yuan was injured by the joint attack of Xiao Han and Jiu Ying. He was already in a precarious situation. Suddenly, a domineering saber aura descended from the top of his head. It was as if the world was being cut apart. In the end, Zhang Yi slashed him into nothingness. Emperor Realm of Zhang Yi nodded. Yes. Zhang Yi nodded. When he broke through the saber formation, his saber intent was perfected. Now, he was the same as Shou Wuk, a first-level Emperor Realm cultivator. Kill. After killing one Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan clan, Zhang Yi turned and pounced on another person. He waved his saber repeatedly. Jean Dilly pierced all the major acupoints in his body. His saber intent became even more violent. Xiao Han smiled. He took a break to watch the battle. At this moment, no matter what level the battle was, the Xianyuan clan was at a disadvantage. The arrival of the Zhan clan cultivator completely crushed this overlord. At this moment, in a certain area of the city, the space was terrifyingly silent. The oppressive atmosphere was suffocating. Zhan Wenjie and Xianyuan Wuba looked at each other across the air. Neither of them said anything more. Whoosh! Between heaven and earth, a wisp of domineering blade chi flowed out of Wenjie's body and instantly formed a violent hurricane of blade chi, which wrapped around his body and rose into the void bit by bit. Emperor light flickered around Xianyuan Wuba's body as he slowly rose into the sky. He could sense an extremely strong threat from his opponent's aura. He realized that this person was far more difficult to deal with than the Battle King, Duan Zhanfei. Although Xianyuan Wuba's cultivation had broken through from the 4th level of the Yuan Emperor realm to the 6th level of the Yuan Emperor realm, he still didn't have much of a chance of winning against Zhan Wenjie. He even had a feeling that he might die in this battle. Whoosh! A halberd fell into his hand. Imperial light circled it, and the might of the great path emanated from it. It was an imperial implement. Xianyuan Wuba held the halberd in his hand, and with a sweep of the halberd, dazzling platinum light filled the sky. It was as if the murderous airflow of the great path had been triggered, which swallowed Zhan Wenjie whole. Zhan Wenjie stepped forward and slowly raised his palm. It was slightly above his head, and he suddenly slashed downwards, drawing out an extremely dazzling blade chi. Intense light of rules flowed like a mad dragon in the sky, piercing through the killing aura that filled the sky. Immediately, the killing aura was reduced to nothing. Kill! The two of them roared at the same time, and the similarly domineering figures collided with each other. With a boom, the sky and earth seemed to collapse. Immediately after, they separated and collided again. The two imperial lights intertwined and separated in the void. Every time they collided, countless cultivators below felt as if they were going to be shaken to death. Qin Hao took a deep breath. His body was covered with wounds, and blood kept flowing out. He stared at Xianyuan Wuying's corpse on the ancient pagoda. His palm stretched out slightly, and the great void divine sword was guided back. It gradually changed from crimson to the original emerald light. Then, Xianyuan Wuying's corpse slid down the ancient pagoda and fell into the dirty soil of the city. At this time, Qin Hao looked up at the void above, at the battle between Zhan Wenjie and Xianyuan Wuba. He smiled slightly and said, "The descendant of Zhan Lang." Zhan Wenjie's domineering blade will was even thicker than Zhan Ye's. It made Qin Hao feel very close to him. It was as if there was a shadow of Zhan Lang in the rushing blade light in the sky. Boom! Crack! A glaring light of catastrophe fell with a thunderous sound, waking Qin Hao up. Qin Hao was not sure if it was because he was stained with Xianyuan Wuying's blood. His blood chi was filled with Xianyuan Wuying's remaining aura. The Emperor's trial in the sky did not disperse. Instead, it condensed even more intensely. A surge of power of catastrophe, as thick as a thunder python, snaked down and crashed toward Qin Hao. Well, it's time to return to the Imperial realm. Qin Hao put away the great void divine sword and dispelled his dragonized state. His body was empty, as if he had turned from a crazy demon into an ordinary person. There was not a trace of vitality in his body. He opened his arms and closed his eyes slightly. He rushed toward the descending light of catastrophe. It felt as if he was going to dedicate himself to it. 36 Major Dao Catastrophes. This should be the 19th one. The poor second prince of Nan Ao could not even withstand 19 streaks of power of catastrophe. At this moment, even the heavens wanted Qin Hao to become an emperor. However, he would not use Xianyuan Wuying's emperor's trial to return to the state of Dendi in his previous life. The remaining power of catastrophe was not enough to refine a perfect emperor's body. It was far from enough. Boom. Crack. The light of catastrophe swallowed Qin Hao. Countless warriors watching the battle were shocked. Xianyuan Wuying was dead, but the emperor's trial did not disperse. The power of catastrophe of the great Tao was crashing toward Qin Hao. At present, the entire imperial city was in a fierce battle. Qin Hao was actually going through the emperor's trial to refine a emperor's body. Creak. In the sky, Xianyuan Gaoyan clenched his fist. Blue veins appeared on his fist. His face was hideous. Pain. Even though he was a sovereign lord and had proven his way, he still could not cut off his mortal desires. Seeing Xianyuan Wuying die in battle, his rock-hard heart seemed to be pierced by a sharp chisel. This feeling, which he had not experienced for a long time, swept through his body at this moment, filling every nerve. Don't worry. Today, everyone here will be buried with you. Xianyuan Gaoyan's clenched fists slowly loosened, and he returned to being the arrogant sovereign lord of Xianyuan. However, the anger in his eyes was even stronger, especially when he looked at the battlefield. With the entry of the southern region's Zhanzong, the Xianyuan family army was completely crushed. They were completely powerless to turn the situation around. The great Xia dynasty was in danger. Li Yuan, are you still not going to make a move? Xianyuan Gaoyan looked at the sovereign of the northern region, Li Yuan. He gritted his teeth and squeezed out a hoarse voice from the gaps between his teeth. The sage palace was restrained by the sword sect and could not support the battle. In the city, the Xianyuan family army was retreating again and again. 4 of the 5 Renhuang battle formations were destroyed, and their foundation was damaged. Zhanzong's entry into the formation became the last straw that broke the southern region's back. It made the situation extremely bad. Emperor Yuan was even killed, and the southern region's imperial realm was also in danger. The only ones who had the ability and qualifications to help them were the northern region's divine nation and the Li family. Make a move. Li Yuan pretended to be stunned for a moment. He smiled slightly and said, like Makamanji, I am also here to enjoy the scenery. What did you say? Xianyuan Gaoyan took a heavy step towards the northern region's formation. He seemed to have broken a tooth in his mouth. An unprecedented rage appeared on his face, and his facial features were distorted. The southern region and the northern region's pride came from the same source. If not, he would not have asked Li Yuan for help before the battle and given him an Empyrean artifact as a reward. After that, he would have divided the Myriad Cultivator Alliance and Knight Luo Palace with the Li family. It was a win-win situation. But what did Li Yuan say to him? When he needed help, the northern region's pride sovereign said to him, I am here to enjoy the scenery. Xianyuan Gaoyan. Li Yuan also took a step forward. He tore off his friendly facade and revealed a greedy and terrifying expression. He said coldly, understand the current situation of your family. Do you want to add another opponent to your family and become enemies with my Li family? A threat. A naked threat. At this moment, the way Li Yuan looked at Xianyuan Gaoyan changed. It was as if he was looking at a prisoner. There was even a trace of pity and sympathy in his eyes. Today, the Li family will not interfere and punish the Xianyuan family's sins together with the many heroes of the southern region's righteous path. Help you? Why should I help you? The northern region's pride Li family does not owe the southern region's pride sovereign. If you think I'm wrong, then I don't mind fighting with you. The proud God Empire had been divided into 2. The Li family had given half of the empire to the Xianyuan clan. Did they owe the southern region's pride sovereign? Did they owe the southern region's pride sovereign? The southern region's pride sovereign no longer existed after the death of the first generation's ancestors. Ha 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 ha. Xianyuan raised his head and laughed wildly. Naive. The dignified Xianyuan Gaoyan could be so naive. That's right. Everyone kicks a man who is down. The northern region's pridely family had always had the ambition to unify the proud god empire. He actually believed that Xianyuan Gaoyan would help the southern region's pride sovereign. Laughable. Too naive. I feel sorry for the Li family's ancestors, Xianyuan Gaoyan said softly. Then, his eyes flashed with boundless ruthlessness. He was caught off guard by a majestic emperor's palm that pressed down from the sky into the city. A crazy roar resounded through the world. Today, I will show you the true strength of the southern region's pride sovereign. If you want to die, then let's die together. Chapter 1589. Xianyuan Gaoyan's palm strike entered the city and arrived instantly, catching everyone off guard. The thearchs and lords' expressions changed, including Yininghong. Although they were on guard, they were still one step too slow, and it was too late to stop it. Rumble! The majestic palm strike crushed everything in its path, and the void seemed to collapse. Countless cracks appeared in the space, and it was unstoppable. How tyrannical was a great emperor! Their movements and stillness were integrated with the great Tao. Their will was the Tao, and their body was the Tao. The terror of their oppressive aura was far from what Xianyuan Wuba could compare to. Any large powerhouse would be suppressed by this palm light. However, Xianyuan Gaoyan did not condense too much power in this palm strike, and it was not enough to cover the entire imperial city. Yininghong would not give him the chance to do so. Moreover, his goal was not to destroy the city. He knew that he would not be able to kill everyone in the city with this palm strike. His real goal was the temple. The magnificent temple was suspended in mid-air in the center of the city. It was majestic, and it radiated with supreme power. It was like the temple of the gods, and it was awe-inspiring. The temple was not only the palace of the thearchs, but it was also the source of the protective formation. Xianyuan Gaoyan wanted to open the second layer of formation power. Only Tharch Xianyuan could activate the second layer of formation power. When the time came, a terrifying offensive Tao would erupt, and all living beings in the city would be attacked. Relying on the protective formation, it would be enough to raze the imperial city to the ground in an instant. Buzz! A powerful palm strike broke through the air and pressed down, covering the temple. The two Tao intents came from the same source, and they could sense each other. The temple flickered with a dazzling brilliance, spewing out endless radiance. At that moment, the entire imperial city shook under the radiance. Then, the palm strike shattered, turning into countless specks of light that flooded the temple. 4 balls of platinum light emerged from the temple and turned into ribbons that flew toward the pillars at the 4 corners of the imperial city. In a flash, they disappeared into the huge pillars. Every formation pillar was being poured in by a waterfall. Rumble! The earth and mountains shook, and the void trembled as well. The earth and rocks in the city tumbled, and all the palaces collapsed one after another. A formless great Tao power radiated from the 4 pillars toward the center of the imperial city, gradually closing in and sealing the entire city. A suffocating sense of crisis invaded everyone's souls, and the desperate slaughter actually stopped at the same time. Numerous shocked gazes looked towards the 4 array pillars. The 4 pillars shook violently as the divine dragon, phoenix, black tortoise, qilin, and other divine beasts carved on the pillars gradually lit up as if blood was being injected into the meridians. The divine dragon, phoenix, black tortoise, qilin, and other divine beasts' patterns quickly spread up the pillars and covered the entire body of the divine beast. Along with this, every time a part of the pattern was lit up, the stone pillars would shatter and turn into powder. The divine beasts in the pattern seemed to have become living creatures, emitting an incomparably powerful aura of life. The body of a dragon, the body of a phoenix, the back of a tortoise, flesh and blood gradually condensed. Roar! Finally, the 4 pillars collapsed at the same time, causing smoke and dust to rise into the sky. Inside the smoke and dust, one could faintly see gigantic creatures moving about. Their auras were comparable to sovereign lords, and with a light step, they caused the heavens and earth to tremble. I can't save my clansmen, but this formation can exterminate all invaders in the city. This is the guardian deity of the Xianyuan family. Take a good look at it. Xianyuan Gaoyan looked at the city and smiled. It was a helpless smile, a bitter smile, but also a smile of satisfaction. He had roped in the sacred hall and the Li family. He had originally thought that this battle would be smooth sailing, and he would eradicate the Zheng clan and knight Luo Palace, allowing the southern proud empire to regain its former glory. However, he had never imagined that things would turn out this way. Sovereign realm defeated. Human sovereign defeated. Yuan Venerate defeated. The army in the city had suffered countless casualties and was routed continuously. Now the general situation was set, and the southern proud empire was isolated. Even as the sovereign lord, Xianyuan Gaoyan could not rely on his own strength to reverse the situation. The only thing he could do was to drag everyone down with him and bury them with the Xianyuan family. In any case, the family had no friends or allies. The Sacred Hall had only taken action to avenge Yu Qianyang and to protect the dignity of the sect. The Li family had taken money to enjoy the scenery and were as indifferent as beasts. In this vast world, no force was willing to sincerely help the Xianyuan family. How sad was the dignified Xianyuan royal family. Then, let's perish together. From now on, the southern region would no longer have the Xianyuan family and any overlord. Whoosh! At the same time that the beast spirits were awakened, Xianyuan Gaoyan decisively took the initiative to attack. A ray of emperor light flashed out like lightning, and a palm suffused with the radiance of laws pressed down on the head of the Zheng family's elder. Boom! It was a one-hit kill effortlessly. The Zheng family's elder struggled in fear, but his entire body was crushed by Xianyuan Gaoyan, and his soul was destroyed. The sovereign lord was so strong that even if Emperor Yuan stood in front of him, he would be slaughtered like a pig or a dog. Xianyuan Gaoyan sneered, and the radiance of Dao corroboration on his body was extremely dazzling. He moved once again. He took a step forward and teleported in front of the elders of the Night Net Palace. His palms struck forward, and a terrifying gravity drowned out the void and rolled back toward his palms. Creak! Xianyuan Gaoyan's palms squeezed the throats of two Night Net Palace elders. May the Night Net Palace prosper forever. Knowing that he was powerless to escape, an elder shouted. There was no fear in his eyes, only endless glory and pride. Xianyuan Gaoyan. Yininghong let out a shrill cry and turned into a dark ray of light, stabbing toward Xianyuan Gaoyan's back. The world was filled with extremely sharp killing intent of Dao corroboration. In fact, when Xianyuan Gaoyan moved to kill Emperor Yuan of the Zheng family, Yininghong had already made her move. But both sides were sovereign lords, and the other party made the first move, resulting in a situation where one side was faster than the other. A terrifying killing intent came from behind. Yininghong's Dao corroboration nomological power surged into Xianyuan Gaoyan's body, causing him to feel cold. But he didn't stop. With a cold smile on his face, he exerted force with both palms, and the nomological power of Dao corroboration burst out, shattering the bodies of the Night Net Palace elders. Both of them died. Pucci! The dark ray of light pierced through. In the midst of the crisis, Xianyuan Gaoyan dodged to the side, and Yininghong flew past him. A piece of his noble dragon robe fluttered in the wind. At this moment, a trace of blood flowed down from the blade that Yininghong was holding tightly. It was the blood of an sovereign lord. However, Xianyuan Gaoyan didn't seem to feel anything. He turned around and stepped forward again. In a flash, a palm filled with a terrifying aura of death pressed down on the heads of Xiao Han and Zhang Yi. He knew that he was injured, but so what? He just wanted to kill to his heart's content. As for Yininghong, he didn't care at all. Buzz! The heavy palm of the great Tao struck down. Xiao Han and Zhang Yi were imprisoned in place. Even though their nomological power erupted wildly, they were as weak as children in front of a Tao corroboration great emperor. This was the power of an sovereign lord. Emperor Yuan was like a god in the eyes of the outside world, but he was like an ant in front of a Tao corroboration great emperor. Even Yi Ninghong, who was also an sovereign lord, couldn't kill him. This was the reason why sovereign lords wouldn't easily intervene in low-level battles. Because once they made a move, everything would be destroyed. It wasn't easy to stop them at all. One person was enough to kill everyone in the world. The same logic applied to Yi Ninghong. If she killed the descendants of the Xianyuan family at all costs, Xianyuan Gaoyan wouldn't be able to stop her. Because of fear, both sides didn't dare to act rashly. But now, the Xianyuan family was about to disappear from the world. Xianyuan Gaoyan had no more scruples. Even if he had to risk his life here, he would make the Night Net Palace and the Zheng clan pay the price. He would make sure that no one below the sovereign lords would live. Crazy. Looking at all this, Li Yuan's mood was a little turbulent. But it was also good. The Xianyuan family was destroyed, and the Zheng clan and Night Net Palace suffered heavy losses. It would only be beneficial for the Li family to control the southern proud empire. Father, that woman can't die. At the critical moment, Li Yaqi anxiously reminded his father. He was talking about Xiao Han, Qin Hao's reverse scale. The reason why the Xianyuan family was in such a miserable situation today was because of Xiao Han. Why are you in such a hurry? Take your time. Li Yuan was very calm. He knew that on the Zheng clan's battleship, there was a powerful existence that could shake an sovereign lord. That person was a big shot of the Divine Palace. If the Divine Palace's powerhouses didn't make a move, what was the point of the Li family interfering? Xianyuan Gaoyan was crazy now, and Li Yuan didn't want to fight against a lunatic. If his sovereign body was injured, it wouldn't be good for him. Otherwise, why didn't Emperor Luo and Emperor Ning Wuming make a move? Swish. At the critical moment, an extremely domineering blade light slashed over, cutting the sky open and slashing in front of Xianyuan Gaoyan. This blade slashed down, directly cutting off his Tao corroboration great emperor. Bang! Xianyuan Gaoyan pressed both of his palms against the saber light. The terrifying saber intent rolled out, releasing an extremely vigorous energy. Xianyuan Gaoyan's arms went numb. He took a step back and steadied himself. He stared ahead. At this time, in front of Xiao Han and Zhang Yi, stood an old man with a white beard. The old man's hands were behind his back, and the light of Tao corroboration flickered around him. An extremely violent blade will emanated from his body, and a pair of emotionless eyes stared coldly at Xianyuan Gaoyan. Tell me your name. Nameless people don't deserve to die in my hands, Xianyuan Gaoyan said. The old man opposite him had the same cultivation as him, perfected Tao corroboration great emperor. However, when the twos will collided just now, the old man slid back several meters. Obviously, his foundation was not as good as Xianyuan Gaoyan's. He probably hadn't touched the sovereign lord level for long, and his realm was not very stable. Zhan Zong, Zhan Guanghe, the old man replied coldly. Zhan Zong was the master of Zhan Zong, a perfected 9th-tier sovereign lord, a Tao corroboration great emperor. When this voice came out, although it wasn't loud, it caused a sensation on the entire battlefield. Countless cultivators who came to watch the battle were so shocked that their mouths were wide open. They looked at the leader of Zhan Zong, who was standing in the void. He was actually an sovereign lord. It turned out that Zhan Zong wasn't a first-rate force, but was also an overlord. Moreover, it was a top overlord force with sovereign lords. The space was silent. Even Sword Emperor Makamanji, Sun God Emperor Luo, Emperor Ningwu, and Li Yuan's hearts trembled at the same time. They didn't expect that apart from the 3 sovereigns and 4 sects, there was actually such a powerful force hidden in the southern region. The people behind Zhan Zong were probably not simple. Xianyuan Gaoyan's shoulder-length black hair danced, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. Zhan Zong's patriarch? But that's all there is to it. Today you will die. The first sovereign lord to die in the southern region will be you. Yining Hong's shrill and angry roar came from behind him. Endless Tao of annihilation pressed down. The space where Xianyuan Gaoyan was standing gradually turned dark. It wasn't a black fog, but the entire space solidified and turned into a pitch-black space. This was the seal of Tao corroboration, Great Emperor. In just a few breaths, Xianyuan Gaoyan killed 3 emperors from the Zheng clan and the Night Luo Palace in one fell swoop. Xiao Han and Zhan Yi also almost died in his hand. How could Yi Ninghong not be worried? Zhan Guang he stopped Xianyuan Gaoyan's footstep. Taking this opportunity, Yi Ninghong was able to use the Night Luo Palace's Tao corroboration Great Emperor to seal him. In this way, the 3 of them could fight unscrupulously until one of them died. Take this girl away, Zhan Guang he said. After speaking, the domineering power in his body erupted and swept out, forming a terrifying sword Tao storm that resonated with heaven and earth. It was as if the great Tao of sword could cut through everything. Patriarch, you must be careful. After Zhan Yi finished speaking, he hurriedly retreated with Xiao Han. In the void, the Sword Sect, Blazing Sun Temple, Ning Wu, Northern Pride, Li family, and various other forces emperors retreated one after another. In the following battle, even emperors weren't qualified to approach. Only sovereign lords could watch from a close distance. Chapter 1590. Above the sky, a suffocating cold air filled the air. A haze spread out, covering a large area like a black hole expanding, drowning the figures of the 3 great emperors. The martial artists outside could no longer see Xianyuan Gaoyan, Yi Ninghong, and Zhan Zong. Countless pairs of eyes stared at the sky. Through the dark haze, they could only see 3 flickering platinum light spots. Each of them was extremely violent. They collided wildly, shaking out layers of cracks. At this moment, the emperors of the various forces retreated far away. Even the Muyan sect, Sun God, Emperor Luo, and the others silently retreated hundreds of feet. They raised their vigilance, and Emperor light surged around their bodies. They were constantly using their Emperor aura to protect their bodies. The 3 people in the haze were all Imperial Masters. This battle was a life and death battle. With the death of an Imperial Master, the power of the eruption could be imagined. Zhan Yi returned to the battleship and looked at the haze. He watched the 3 platinum light spots collide frequently. Even though he retreated far away, he could still clearly feel that the battle was very intense. Recalling the scene just now, he was suppressed by Xianyuan Gaoyan's Tao confirming rules. It was as if he was facing an unshakable mountain. Even though he tried his best to resist, it was useless. At this moment, he still felt a chill from the bottom of his heart. After Zhan Yi had an epiphany in the sword array and reached perfection in his Tao confirming rules, he took the opportunity to enter the Great Emperor realm. After mastering the power of Dili, he felt as if he was the only one in the world. He thought that he was strong enough, but in the face of Xianyuan Gaoyan, he was as weak as an ant. Tao confirming great emperors were simply terrifying. Now that he thought about it, he knew how strong the evil soul in the divine palace was. Muri, as an unblemished great emperor, delayed the evil soul for so long. She was also terrifying. This made Zhan Yi recognize his own position again. He was far from enough. I hope the ancestor is safe. Zhan Yi raised his head and said. Xianyuan Gaoyan was alone, while Zhan Zong and Yi Ninghong had joined forces. However, the battle between Imperial Masters was still extremely dangerous. You have to believe in the sword Tao of the Slayer clan. Xiao Han said softly. Xianyuan Gaoyan was indeed very strong, but Zhan Zong wasn't an ordinary person either. His bloodline power was equally domineering. Moreover, with Palace Master Yi joining forces, they would definitely win. Zhang Yi nodded, and the two of them watched the battle. At this moment, as the sovereign lords started fighting, the eight-winged black dragon from the Xianyuan family also went berserk. It flapped its huge wings that were filled with power, creating a terrifying storm as it tangled with the demonic aureole. The two beast monarchs had the same cultivation level, infinitely close to the sovereign lord level. They fought fiercely. However, the city descended into chaos. As Xianyuan Gaoyan activated the second clan protecting formation, the four pillars collapsed, and the beast spirits were awakened. Enormous creatures that seemed to have come from ancient times walked around, emitting terrifying power that could destroy the heavens and earth. Without needing anyone to give the order, all the remaining members of the Xianyuan family in the city immediately ran towards the divine temple. Only by hiding in the divine temple would they be able to avoid being killed by the beast spirit. Once these beast spirits were awakened, they would attack indiscriminately. Anything that emitted the aura of life would be attacked by them. This was also the reason why Xianyuan Gaoyan didn't open it easily. Unless the survival of his family was in danger, he wouldn't open it. More importantly, the price of awakening the beast spirit was too great. The four pillars that towered into the clouds were entirely composed of celestial crystals. They were the foundation of the Xianyuan royal family and had been stored for a long time. Now that they had collapsed and exhausted all their spiritual power, the foundation of thousands of years was gone. For the Xianyuan royal family, the loss was extremely heavy. Otherwise, Xianyuan Gaoyan wouldn't have watched Xianyuan Wuying being chased by Qin Hao and not open the formation. It was because he really couldn't open it. But now, all of this was no longer important. Xiao Han's gaze fell on the city. All the members of the Xianyuan royal family were rushing towards the divine temple, ignoring the enemies chasing behind them. This included the few remaining Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family. They turned into streams of light and flew towards the divine temple. The Knight Luo Palace and Zheng clan experts didn't chase after them. They were powerless to do so now. Xianyuan Gaoyan killed 3 of them in an instant, and one of them had his Tharch body shattered. The Zhan clan experts also didn't chase after them. The aura of the beast spirit in the city was too strong. Although it wasn't at the Emperor level, it wasn't weaker than the 8-winged black dragon and the 8-winged demon Oriole. If they weren't careful, they might die under the attacks of the beast spirit. The situation in the city now became a bit funny. The two armies were running in opposite directions at the same time, like two tides separating. The moment they were threatened by the beast spirit, they behaved so tacitly. At present, there were only 4 people in the city who didn't move. Zhan Wenjia and Xianyuan Wuba fell into a frenzy. Sword lights slashed and halberd lights flew, wanting to take each other's lives. The battle was so intense that they entered a state of selflessness. The two of them didn't seem to notice that the beast spirit had awakened. In addition, the light of the Tharch tribulation fell and drowned a body. That body didn't have any aura at first, but now it gradually glowed with golden-white Tharch light, becoming more and more sacred. Qin Hao was still transcending the tribulation. He didn't leave, so naturally, Su Jin wouldn't leave either. Even though the city was in chaos, the beast spirit's huge body blocked the sun, and its shadow shrouded Su Jin's head. He still stood firmly in place to protect Qin Hao. Even if the beast spirit's huge palm came crashing down, he wouldn't hesitate to block it. Pucci! A mass of Tharch light burst, and blood splattered in all directions. Emperor Yuan of a certain branch of the Xianyuan family was about to fly into the temple, but halfway through, a terrifying dragon claw stomped down and crushed him to the ground. The speed at which the dragon claw fell seemed to be very slow, but Emperor Yuan's flying speed was extremely fast. However, he was shot down halfway. As if destined, the dragon claw pierced through his physical body and directly crushed his divine soul. Roar! Amidst the smoke and dust, a ferocious dragon head poked out and roared towards the sky. The sound waves radiated all the way and the sky trembled. Immediately, this dragon saw a beam of light falling from the sky and was immediately attracted. In the next second, its huge body slowly moved in the direction of Qin Hao. Huh! Sun God's gaze fell, and the disappearance of the large aura naturally attracted his attention. Seeing that Emperor Yuan of the Xianyuan family was killed by the beast spirit, he didn't feel the slightest ripple in his heart. But at this moment, his attention shifted along with the beast spirit and also fell on the light of tribulation. That pair of sharp golden eyes penetrated the light of tribulation and saw Qin Hao inside at a glance. Immediately, Sun God stretched out his hand, and the power of Tao validation swept out. With a flip of his palm, a wisp of dark Tao fire flew down and blasted towards the light of tribulation. Qin Hao wanted to transcend the tribulation and become an arch? He wouldn't allow it. Swoosh! A wisp of Tao validation sword energy was born at the same time. The platinum light was incomparably intense, and it flew closely behind the Tao fire. Break! Makamanji spat out a voice. With his mind, he controlled the sword energy to pierce into the Tao fire. Accompanied by the raging sword light, the Tao fire was instantly torn into pieces. Sun God raised his head and looked at Makamanji. As if issuing a final warning, he said coldly, "In this battle, I will only kill one person." After killing one person, he would leave. Now that Qin Hao was dead, he wouldn't attack anyone else. Whether the Night Luo Palace and the Zheng clan wanted to destroy the Xianyuan family or dominate the southern region, it had nothing to do with him. Don't be so obsessed. Makamanji's pupils shrank slightly. Like a sword light piercing towards Sun God, his tone began to turn cold, as if warning the other party. In this endless imperial city battlefield, anyone could die, but only Qin Hao couldn't die. Sun God could kill anyone, but if he killed Qin Hao, Makamanji wouldn't stand by and watch. It wasn't just for Qin Hao, but also for Sun God and the Blazing Sun Temple. Makamanji cherished this friendship and didn't want to see Sun God repeat Xianyuan Gaoyan's mistake. Otherwise, tomorrow the sacred temple and the sacred mountain would be like this scene below. Makamanji, you disappoint me. Sun God let out a sigh. Boom, 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 boom. More than 10 lava giants stepped in the void, and the rules of fists broke through the air and blasted towards the Sword Emperor. All-directional sword destruction. Makamanji roared, and the light of the way around him shone brightly, blinding everyone's eyes. The terrifying sword will swallowed up the sky, and with a thought, he drew out his sword and turned it into more than 10 giant swords that circled around him, stabbing towards the lava giants. The sword light shattered the fists and struck the fire spirit true body. Boom! The sky was completely turned into a sea of fire, and Sun God's golden hair hung upside down as if it was burning, turning into a sacred flame. He grasped the air, and the sea of fire surged. Many fire spirit fighting souls appeared and merged with the lava giant. At this moment, the great path in the sky was penetrated by the will of the way fire. I have no choice but to borrow the sword from the heavens. Makamanji's spiritual soul felt like it was melting, and the great path fire had already threatened his life. He raised his sword above his head, and a beam of sword chi burst out, breaking through the clouds and piercing through the great path fire. The sword chi was connected to the sky. Emperor Luo, Emperor Ming, and Li Yuan saw this, and their eyes widened, and they retreated far away from the battle. Seeing that the Xianyuan family was about to be finished, Makamanji and Sun God were fighting again. Swish, swish, swish. The sword matrix fell and collided with the great path fire, and the sky was filled with sword chi and flames. Sword Emperor and Sun God fell into a fierce battle in the blink of an eye. Their movements were too fast, and almost no one could see clearly. They could only see countless sword chi being constantly melted, and at the same time, the great path fire was rapidly weakening. At this moment, the warriors of the southern region who were watching the battle were numb. 2 more Imperial Lords had fallen into a life-and-death battle. However, surprisingly, the upper echelons of the Sword Sect and the Sacred Temple did not make any more move. The people of the 2 sects kept their distance very quietly, watching their Imperial Lords carefully. Boom! Crack! In the city, the light of calamity of the Great Path continued, and waves of calamity power bombarded Qin Hao's body. In the light of calamity, Qin Hao's Imperial Qi was surging more and more. It's the 40th and 20th. Su Jin stood guard and counted silently. There were 36 tribulations of the Great Path. Why was Qin Hao's tribulation different from the others? Logically speaking, it should be over. At this moment, the corner of Su Jin's mouth twitched slightly. He suddenly thought that Qin Hao himself seemed to have the ability to summon the Imperial Tribulation. If he summoned his own Imperial Tribulation, plus the tribulations that Xianyuan Wuying did not survive. Indeed, 36 tribulations were not enough. Even if 42 tribulations were blasted down, there were still 12 more. Su Jin was considering whether or not he should also try summoning another Empyrean tribulation. But it seemed that he already had a perfect imperial physique. Buzz! A huge black shadow shrouded down, and the terrifying aura of an evil dragon filled the air. It entered Su Jin's spiritual soul, causing his heart to tremble violently. Guardian Beast Spirit. Su Jin raised his head and happened to meet a pair of huge dragon eyes. It was a pair of empty eyes, as terrifying as a hole. This was troublesome. Qin Hao was still bathing in the Imperial Tribulation. At this time, it could not be interrupted. Otherwise, he would not be able to build a perfect Imperial physique. Just then, the guardian beast spirit of the Xianyuan family came over. This pressure was extremely strong, approaching the level of the Imperial Lord. Even as a disciple of the Divine Palace, Su Jin was far from being able to compete with it. Whoosh! Without giving him any time to think, a terrifying huge dragon claw stepped down. The sharp light of the claw tore the space apart and followed the light of calamity to bury Qin Hao. Su Jin looked up at the sharp claw, and his soul seemed to be deeply pierced. He could not even summon the strength to resist. He gritted his teeth and roared, "Senior sister." Chapter 1591. The South Pole Divine Palace pursued the limits of martial arts. The 7 Peak Masters had always believed in breaking through the shackles of nirvana and becoming God. They were detached from the world and ignored the disputes of the mortal world. This was the attitude of the Divine Palace, and it was not a deliberate rule. Miaoli came from the main peak of Migres and had the most orthodox orthodoxy. Even though the Divine Palace was destroyed, as the orthodox preacher of the Divine Palace, she would silently follow the attitude of the Divine Palace. This could be seen from Xianyuan Gaoyan's killing of Emperor Yuan of the Night Net Palace. He would not destroy the rules of survival in the outside world. Moreover, she had already made it clear that she would not intervene in this battle unless it was absolutely necessary. However, at this time, the guardian beast spirits of the Xianyuan royal family were awakened. The 4 divine beasts were so powerful that even if Sword Emperor, Emperor Luo, and Li Yuan took action, it would be difficult to suppress them for a while. Muri had to do it herself. Qin Hao was her junior martial brother. Although he didn't receive any teachings from the same generation and was only a disciple of true Lord Migres's obsession, he was still her junior martial brother. How could she not save him? If she thought that this battle was a test for the disciples of the Divine Palace, then killing Qin Hao by the beast spirits was no longer a test. Su Jin's soul seemed to be pierced as the dragon claw pressed down. The rules in his body stagnated, and he was unable to move. He deeply experienced the horror of the Imperial Lord level. Many people looked over. In addition to the battle between Xianyuan Gaoyan and Yininghong, the biggest commotion in the city was Qin Hao's imperial tribulation. As the huge and boundless dragon claw pierced into the light of tribulation, the expressions of the martial artists of the southern region changed drastically. They took a deep breath. Qin Hao might not be able to survive this tribulation. The strength of the four beast spirits was infinitely close to that of an imperial lord. They had no thoughts and were uncontrollable. Xianyuan Gaoyan could not control so many beast spirit. Once they were awakened, they would destroy everything. The people of the Xianyuan royal family would not be spared. Qin Hao had not become an imperial lord. What qualifications did he have to resist? At this moment, Xiao Han and Zhang Ye's expressions changed, and their hearts were in their mouths. Whoosh! A ray of light flew out from the cabin of the main ship, and the platinum light shone brightly. It crossed the sky and fell into the city, containing an extremely terrifying Dao might. When this aura appeared, the expressions of Li Yuan, Emperor Ming, and the others changed slightly. A powerhouse of the Divine Palace? Great Emperor! No, the white gold Emperor's light was very different from the Emperor's Qi of Dao verification. Wuck! Great Dao! Wuck! Even so, the emperors and lords present could feel how powerful it was because everyone felt as if their souls were being suppressed. However, this aura gave people the feeling that she controlled everything in the world. It was as if she was the great Tao, and all living things had to obey her will. The emperor's aura pierced through the air and flashed into the city. It landed on the head of the evil dragon beast spirit and went down. It didn't cause any strange phenomenon, but the emperor's aura was full of the power of Wuck. It penetrated the evil dragon's head and went all the way through. With a bang, an earth-shattering collapse occurred. The giant shadow of the evil dragon split into pieces and scattered all over the sky. Before it fell to the ground, it turned into stone powder. With one blow, it killed the guardian beast spirit that was comparable to an imperial lord. Then, the emperor's aura continued to fly. It was so fast that no one could blink. It penetrated the abdomen of the phoenix beast spirit and pierced into the body of the black tortoise. Bang! Before the phoenix could fly, and the black tortoise could not retract its shell, both of them were destroyed. The emperor's aura continued to fly. It passed through the giant shadows of the Qilin, white tiger, and other beast spirits as if it had grown eyes. With one blow, the aura of the beast spirits in the city dissipated. The destructive aura that shrouded the entire imperial city turned into nothingness, as if it was a bubble. At this time, the emperor's aura slowly dissipated, revealing a jade ruler. It was Yun E Peak's array-breaking emperor's weapon, the Lord Dao ruler. So powerful! Li Yuan witnessed all of this. He clenched his fists so hard that blue veins popped out. At this time, his body and mind were trembling. This person's cultivation is definitely not below the great ancestors. Emperor Ning Wu's face was also very nervous. Unknowingly, his forehead was sweating. Ning Wu's third line also had a great ancestor. Like Ning Tsongsong, the great ancestor of the fifth line, he had stepped into the second realm of Emperor Dao. He was the great emperor of True Self. He knew very well how powerful the great emperor of True Self was. He was above the great emperors of Dao, proving, however, that seemingly ordinary and flawless emperor's aura had destroyed all the beast spirits in the city without destroying the great Dao of heaven and earth. What kind of realm was this? Emperor Ming suspected that even his great ancestor could not do it. Boom! Crack! The light of tribulation fell one after another. The platinum radiance on Qin Hao's body became more and more dazzling. The overflowing aura of an Emperor Yuan almost covered the entire battlefield. Almost everyone could perceive that an Emperor Yuan was about to succeed in transcending the tribulation. The 53rd one. As the beast spirits were destroyed, Su Jin's mood suddenly relaxed. He stared intently at the body in the light of tribulation. He increasingly discovered that Qin Hao's emperor body was different from the other emperors. Chapter 1592. It was a kind of growth for a human sovereign to comprehend the great Tao of martial arts, from mastering the embryonic form of rules to perfected rules. The moment one became an emperor, it was a sublimation. Only by perfecting rules could one trigger the imperial tribulation and construct the body of an emperor. Otherwise, the physical body of a human sovereign wouldn't be able to support the perfected rules of the great Tao. Therefore, every powerhouse who successfully broke through to the great Tao of martial arts had reached great success in mastering the rules of martial art. From then on, there would no longer be an obvious advantage between emperors, unless it was a perfected imperial lord. However, Su Jin felt an oppressive aura from Qin Hao that belonged to a superior, an innate oppressive force. This was unusual. After all, Su Jin had constructed an emperor's body. When facing Qin Hao, he shouldn't have such a feeling of inferiority. Boom! Another beam of great Tao tribulation light fell. The terrifying might of the Tao seemed to have gathered all the previous tribulation power. A boundless beam of light blasted down from the sky and poured on Qin Hao's body. At this moment, the Emperor's body under the tribulation light flickered with an extremely thick platinum color, as if his entire body had become corporeal. A layer of Emperor light swept out, dispersing the tribulation power of the great Tao and radiating towards the endless area of the imperial city. Above the void, the tribulation of Tao was exhausted, and the tribulation clouds slowly dissipated. However, inside the city, Qin Hao was bathed in the platinum emperor light. The two strands of white hair in front of his forehead turned into an elegant silver color, suffused with a platinum luster. When his eyes slowly opened, a sacred emperor light flashed from his pupils. His spiritual power covered the entire southern Pride realm with a single thought. The power of the Emperor realm is back, Qin Hao said with a smile and gently clenched his fist. Although he didn't return to the peak of his previous life, he didn't need to unleash his emperor spirit. With a single thought, he could perceive the entire southern Pride realm. This was the power that belonged to Emperor Yuan. Circulating his vitality slightly, the red lotus fire surged around his body. His blood churned, and there seemed to be the roar of a dragon's soul. The meteorite law and the burning law circulated at the same time, and an extremely terrifying Emperor Yuan's aura raged out. The ground under Qin Hao's feet cracked inch by inch, and the endless area around him was about to fall under his Emperor Qi. In particular, when Qin Hao circulated the indestructible samsara technique, traces of terrifying emperor light shot out from between his fists. It was like dense lightning that devoured the surroundings, wanting to tear everything apart. Big brother, stop! Su Jin's body and mind trembled as he faced Qin Hao's Dharch aura head-on. He felt as if his divine soul was about to be crushed. He had just entered the Dharch realm and was only at Emperor Yuan's first level. Yet, he already felt as if he was facing an imperial lord. It was actually so shocking and terrifying. I'm sorry, I just couldn't control my emotions and clenched my fist slightly. Qin Hao was also frightened and hurriedly dispersed the indestructible samsara technique. Just now, he could feel the fear in Su Jin's heart, and he didn't doubt that if he wrapped Su Jin's Dharch body slightly, it would be enough to instantly tear Su Jin's Dharch body apart. Su Jin's face stiffened. When the aura of the indestructible samsara technique dissipated from Qin Hao's body, the soul-tearing oppression disappeared. He walked over slowly and said, "Big brother, your state of becoming a Dharch seems to be completely different from Wuk and sister, Xiaohan." When Su Jin faced Showuk and Xiaohan, he didn't feel any threat. In essence, he was also an Dharch. Soul power and Tao intent are different, right? Qin Hao smiled, raised his hand, and patted Su Jin's shoulder twice. The soul in Su Jin's body was Gooden. In the illusory palace, he called him Big Brother. Now that he came out with him, Qin Hao was his only family. Just now, when the beast spirits were pressuring him from all directions, he didn't retreat half a step and firmly protected Qin Hao. Qin Hao saw all of this clearly. What do we do now? Su Jin asked. In this battle, the Xianyuan royal family was utterly defeated. Only a few experts escaped into the temple, while the rest of the army was killed by the beast spirits. The only fly in the ointment was that Chang Hello was still alive. However, he wouldn't live for long. Qin Hao looked at the battle and immediately looked at the top of the sky. In a large space sealed by haze, there were extremely violent collisions. At this moment, the red lotus fiery eyes flashed. A pair of scarlet eyes pierced through the void like arrows and shot into the haze. Sealed by Yining Hong's Tharch technique, although he couldn't see the details inside, Qin Hao could still recognize the silhouettes of the three figures. From the aura, it was easier to recognize. Zhan Guanghe, the leader of the Zhan sect, had inherited the Zhan clan's blade Dao. His domineering blade was wide open, and every strike had the spirit to sweep the world. Yining Hong's cultivation came from the Night Demon Emperor, and she was an expert who specialized in the Tao of assassination. Qin Hao saw that she seemed to have merged with the haze. The space was filled with her aura, and he couldn't accurately pinpoint her location. However, she would often attack from unexpected places and suddenly give the opponent a fatal blow. Qin Hao couldn't see how serious Xianyuan Gaoyan's injury was, but every time a light flashed, the Emperor of Nanao's aura would drop a little. Even so, his aura was still very strong, giving people the feeling that he was getting braver and braver. Facing the joint attack of Zhan Guanghe and Yining Hong, no matter how many injuries he suffered, his Tharch aura stood firm. The leader of the Xianyuan family is indeed very different from the other members of the royal family. Qin Hao said. Xianyuan Gaoyan's valiant aura was not found in Xianyuan Feng, Xianyuan Jie, or even Xianyuan Wuying. This could explain why Xianyuan Wutian dared to fight with Dendi at the East Continent's imperial banquet 600 years ago. It was because Xianyuan Wutian was the same as Xianyuan Gaoyan, unwilling to submit. If it wasn't for his fear of Qin Hao's sunset divine bow, Xianyuan Wutian might not have run away and dared to fight with his flawless Tharch realm. Pucci. At this moment, a beam of majestic blade qi surged like a huge wave, cutting the space and splitting the sky above the imperial city into two, tearing a pitch-black crack. Endless blade qi surged out, and the waves surged forward, swallowing a burly middle-aged man with a halberd. It was Xianyuan Wuba. Qin Hao looked over. Zhan Ye's father's attack had almost completely released the profound of the nine heavens continuous slash. After this attack, life and death will be decided. Between Zhan Wutian and Xianyuan Wuba, one of them must die. Chapter 1593. There were 9 forms in one blade, and the 9 forms combined into one. It was the ultimate secret of the blade of the clan Slayer. The blade will merged with the great path and exploded in an instant. Its power was terrifying. At this moment, the space in front of Xianyuan Wuba was cut in half. The blade light was blazing, and its endless power was like a giant wave, swallowing everything. It made people feel as if they had fallen into the bottom of the ocean, and they felt desperate. Xianyuan Wuba roared, and the majestic emperor's light raged around him. The great path's gravity sealed the space. His burly body was hit by the blade wave, but he did not move. His halberd burst with platinum light, and the precepts merged into it. He stabbed forward, spewing out an endless stream of gravity. The giant wave was suppressed, and the blade light could not cut through. "You've done your best to force me to use the extreme blade." Zhan Wenjie pointed forward with his left finger, and the extreme blade's precepts flew out and merged into the blade. In an instant, the murderous aura in front of him surged. Giant waves surged and exploded, shattering the precept's gravity seal. The sharp blade light slashed down. Swoosh! The blade cut into Xianyuan Wuba's body in the blink of an eye. A silver thread-like blade mark slashed across his chest from his left shoulder to the lower corner of his right abdomen. Xianyuan Wuba looked down at his body. At this moment, the blade will that shrouded his head dissipated, and the surrounding space became extremely quiet. There was no longer any murderous aura. However, this blade cut into his body, and his internal organs and meridians were all shattered by the blade will. This slash also cut into his spiritual soul at the same time. A powerful opponent. In his life, other than Xianyuan Gaoyan, Zhang Wenjie was the first expert who could kill Xianyuan Wuba. The Western Liang War King, Duan Zhanfei, was far from this level. You've won, but the one who dies may not be me. Xianyuan Wuba suddenly looked up, and there was a terrifying madness in his eyes. A mysterious flow of light surrounded his body. His body, which should have been cut in two, was surrounded by the flow of light. The blade mark on his chest was healing at a visible rate. At the same time, an extremely dangerous aura burst out, covering Emperor Xuanyuan's halberd. The halberd's emperor's weapon's power spread, and it was completely covered in a layer of platinum. Xianyuan Wuba held the halberd and rushed forward, stabbing it into Zhang Wenjie's chest. Swoosh! The halberd pierced through his body and into his heart. Zhang Wenjie was stunned. Why? Xianyuan Wuba was killed by Yi Futian's extreme blade rule, but his monarch body was extraordinary. Instead of dying, Xianyuan Wuba unleashed even more power. Why? Zhang Wenjie couldn't figure it out. But at the critical moment, Emperor Yuan reacted quickly. As soon as the tip of the halberd pierced the outer edge of his heart, he retreated frantically like a meteor, avoiding the crisis of having his heart crushed. Even so, with the law of gravity entering his body, Zhang Wenjie could not avoid being heavily injured. It's the cosmos soil. Qin Hao's expression changed as he saw Xianyuan Wuba and Zhang Wenjie closing in on each other crazily. The power that repaired Xianyuan Wuba's body was one of the 9 elements of desolation, which was as famous as the wind of misfortune and the red lotus fire, heaven and earth. This earth could form a human body, making it indestructible. It wasn't something ordinary power could break down. Although Xianyuan Wuba was hit by Wenjie's surekill strike and his divine soul was severely injured, his emperor body was made of universal earth and was not something that could be easily destroyed by the saber intent. This was troublesome. Senior, it's dangerous. Su Jin was about to rush over. It's useless if you go. Qin Hao pulled him back to where he was. Su Jin's cultivation was at most at the first level of the martial emperor realm. He would not be able to withstand one attack from Xianyuan Wuba. Moreover, no matter how Su Jin attacked, he would not be able to hurt the body of the divine earth. Right now, there were only 2 ways to kill him. Either senior sister Empress Wu Xia would do it. The other was Buzz. The great void divine sword appeared in Qin Hao's palm. As his mind swept out, a noble emperor's sash that glowed with emperor's light flew from Qiao Er's direction and floated in front of him. Qin Hao placed the sword on the emperor's sash. It was like a sharp thorn, shining with endless sharpness. The red lotus fire in his body roared, and the blood-like demonic flames surged into the sword. At that moment, a formless and terrifying wind seemed to blow between heaven and earth. To break the cosmos soil, only the power of an element of the same level could destroy it. The red lotus fire had become Qin Hao's primordial spirit. Its power was temporarily weakened, and it could only return to its original state as his cultivation level increased. However, the great void divine sword contained the complete power of the wind of misfortune. Even the nirvana enchantment of the divine palace could be cracked by the wind. Could the body of Xianyuan Wushuang be tougher than the body of the nirvana heavenly emperor? Go! The art of indestructible samsara was activated, and the law of ripping was integrated into the sunset arrow technique. When Qin Hao's fingers loosened, the Emperor's sash let out a hair-raising tremor. The great void divine sword turned into an arrow of light and shot toward Xianyuan Wushuang. Suddenly, the roar of a violent storm shook heaven and earth. Wherever the arrow light passed, everything was crushed into powder. This crushing momentum was overbearing and unstoppable. Xianyuan Wushuang held the Emperor's Xianyuan halberd. Risking his divine soul being injured, Xianyuan Wushuang gathered his vital qi like a madman, wanting to kill Zhang Wenjie. However, at that moment, a sense of danger that made his heart palpitate rushed toward him. Xianyuan Wushuang turned his head, and the scene that came into his eyes terrified him. He saw a sword light burning with billowing demonic flames flying toward him. As it flew past, a deep gully was created on the ground. The sword light tore through everything and was wrapped in a terrifying storm. This suffocating killing aura was even more terrifying than Xianyuan Gaoyan's. Xianyuan Wushuang had no chance to dodge. His eyes widened, and he turned his halberd to stab at the sword light. Clang! A cluster of violent sparks exploded, and the halberd was shaken off by the wind. At that moment the scene seemed to be still. Xianyuan Wushuang's hands were empty, and the scenes of the past appeared in his mind. He, the southern proud crown prince, had too many glorious achievements in his life. Whether it was within his family, or when he wandered around the various sects in the southern region, the places where he left his footprints were branded with his glory. In the process, all the geniuses and heroes became his stepping stones, paving the way for his rise. Xianyuan Wushuang was disdainful of the enemy's reverence. He was also surrounded by countless peerless beauties. However, none of them could enter his eyes. The only person he pursued was the southern proud emperor. Xianyuan Gaoyan had worked hard all his life to become the perfect successor of the southern proud emperor. He believed that one day, he would no longer have to look up at his father's back. He would definitely be able to stand at the same height as his father. But why? He had not become the sovereign lord, but he was going to die on the path of his ideals. And the person who killed him was Qin Hao, a person who was not qualified to make him look at him seriously. No. Boom! The still scene was shattered, and at the same time, Xianyuan Wushuang's body was shattered. When the flaming sword light swept past, it easily tore his body apart. The southern proud crown prince was blown to pieces in the raging wind. His divine soul fell and was strangled, and he let out an earth-shattering howl. The howl was so tragic that it resounded through the heavens and the earth, straight into the ninth heaven, and seemed to spread throughout the entire southern region. At that moment, the entire battlefield was silent. Even the Moon clan and the Sun God clan both stopped. All the sovereign lords looked down, and the scene in front of them made their hearts tighten. So strong? Makamanji exclaimed. He could no longer imagine how Qin Hao, who had just become a sovereign, could shoot Xianyuan Wushuang, who was a sixth-level sovereign. When his gaze fell on the arrow that flew by, he felt as if his soul had been penetrated. Impossible! The sun god lost his composure. The sovereign lord of the sacred hall, who was known as the reincarnation of the fire god, had a face full of horror. It was impossible for the aura of this arrow to appear here. In fact, it should not have reappeared in the world. 600 years ago, the owner of this arrow had died long ago. But why? The sun god's gaze moved away from the arrow flying in the void, and slowly fell on Qin Hao. His imposing manner and cold eyes suddenly overlapped with someone in his impression. There was a loud boom. The sun god's brain seemed to be on the verge of exploding. He no longer had the demeanor of a sovereign lord. At that moment, he was trembling as he floated in the sky. In front of the countless southern region martial artists, his legs couldn't help but tremble violently. The terrifying shadow buried deep in his heart seemed to roll back along with his memories, devouring his soul. He actually wanted to escape. Crack! There was a violent explosion in the void. The huge haze that swallowed Xianyuan Gaoyan, Yining Hong, and Zhang Guang he suddenly shattered at that moment. In the black fog, the aura of 3 sovereign lords flew out one after another. The first to rush out was the lord of the Xianyuan clan. At that moment, Xianyuan Gaoyan's dragon robe was torn, and his body was covered in strips of cloth. Dense saber and sword wounds covered his entire body. Through the broken flesh, one could see the white bones in many places. Blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth, and his hair was wet with sweat and blood. Xianyuan Gaoyan ignored the pursuit of the 2 sovereign lords behind him, and flew down from the sky. His 5 fingers clasped downwards, and the great path of gravity in his palm crushed the space, forming a vortex. He forcibly pulled out a wisp of Xianyuan Wuba's incomplete soul from the wind. Without stopping, the sovereign light surged and erupted, and he teleported toward the divine palace of the imperial city. Do you think you can escape? A majestic saber aura crushed the heavens. The saber emitted 9 lights, and the 9 lights merged into one. Zhang Guang's master gathered his will into a saber, and a giant saber was born in the sky. The great path of rules fell towards Xianyuan Gaoyan's head, wanting to block and kill him. Get lost! Xianyuan Gaoyan roared. He raised his hand, and the Xianyuan war halberd fell into his palm. He swept the halberd across the sky, and the halberd light went against the momentum. Wrapped in the great path's great path of gravity, the halberd light collided with the falling saber. Poof! Zhang Guang's emperor body shook, and the great path of rules pressed down on his body. As if he had been hit by a heavy mountain, he flew back madly in the void, spilling a trail of blood. However, at the same time, Xianyuan Gaoyan was also blasted down from the sky, and he crashed into the ground. The broken imperial city shook, and countless cracks appeared. Then, a ray of emperor light shook up the dust, and it was reflected from the ground into the divine palace. Stop! Yining Hong's body was like a pitch-black dagger. The emperor light tore through the space, and she chased after Xianyuan Gaoyan. She would not give him a chance to enter the divine palace. Beast sovereign, be loyal to me. Xianyuan Gaoyan let out a cry that sounded like a cry. Roar! Above the sky, a boundlessly majestic giant pressed down. It flapped its 8 wings, and the black dragon beast sovereign of the Xianyuan royal family stepped down. It used its flesh and blood to block Yining Hong, separating her from Xianyuan Gaoyan. Those who stop me will die. Yining Hong's emperor light condensed into a sharp pitch-black dagger. With her emperor body as the blade, the great path of rules circulated, and she continued to move forward. The black dragon let out a frenzied roar. The dragon's aura shook, and its dragon claws pierced forward, clashing with the tip of the pitch-black dagger. Chapter 1594. Between heaven and earth, there seemed to be a destructive storm. The dragon's aura suppressed the heavens, and all beasts prostrated themselves. The black dragon was like a true dragon king that wanted to bury the entire imperial city. The dragon's aura wreaked havoc on its enormous body. Its claw light grabbed at the black dagger, wanting to shatter it. Yining Hong's monarch body was like a dagger. Surging killing aura burst out and pierced into the storm. It withstood the dragon's aura bombardment and pierced towards the black dragon's body bit by bit. The black dragon's roar became more and more violent. The dragon's claw was unable to grab the dagger, unable to shatter the Tao protection of the Tao proving great emperor. Although the Xianyuan imperial family's guardian beast monarch was infinitely close to the emperor level, it had not reached that step yet. It could only watch as the dagger light pierced through the dragon's scales and gradually sank into its flesh. However, the dragon's roar that was able to enter the divine soul made Yining Hong feel very uncomfortable. The black dragon's body was tyrannical and was good at attacking. In a frontal battle, she could not display the advantage of her assassination Dao. Screech! At this moment, a huge black shadow swept down from the void. The eight-winged demon Oriole let out a shrill cry as it rushed into the storm. Its sharp claws reached out and its mountain-like body stomped heavily on the black dragon's head. This stomp caused the void to tremble and the ground to sink. The sharp claws emitted endless radiance and pierced into the black dragon's head. Blood splattered and the latter let out an extremely painful roar. With the demon Oriole's help, sharing part of the black dragon's aura, Yinninghong turned into a dagger. In an instant it shone brightly. With a crack it forcefully pierced through the dragon's claw and nailed into the black dragon's body. Dao-proving Dilly swept out. His killing Dao intent penetrated the black dragon's body. Dense rays of light pierced through the black dragon's body. Just at this moment, Zhang Guanghe's tyrannical blade slashed down from the sky. The Dragon Slayer blade was like layers of huge waves overlapping each other. It forcefully shattered the dragon's aura and actually cut the black dragon into two. Roar! The saber light slashed out and the dragon roared. The beast monarch of the Xian Yuan imperial family was outnumbered, and its huge dragon body fell down. In the imperial city, the dragon qi dispersed. At this moment, the demonic Oriole let out a sharp cry, as if venting the emotions that had been suppressed in her heart for many years. Flapping her 8 wings, she flew into the sky and circled around. In her claws, she grabbed a sparkling object. It was the Emperor's core that she had taken out from the black dragon's body. The Emperor's light was incomparably divine. She directly swallowed it into her stomach. In an instant, the Emperor's qi on the demonic Oriole's body became even denser. Her qi was faintly approaching the level of Yinninghong and Zhang Guanghe. Puchi! As the blade light flashed, endless dragon blood sprayed into the sky and dyed half of the sky red. The 9-headed snakelet's body rushed over crazily and bathed in the dragon blood. Its 9 snake heads swallowed with all their might. However, when it looked at the demonic Oriole, its 18 snake eyes were filled with intense greed. Compared to the dragon blood, the black dragon emperor core was the most precious. If he had swallowed it, Jiao Ying might have turned into a dragon. Unfortunately, he was one step too late. Emoing had taken it away first. It wasn't just him. At this moment, the dog spirit, Ahei, and Huang all rushed towards the black dragon's corpse. In front of countless people, they started eating. The scene was extremely bloody. A beast emperor's entire body was a treasure. Its blood, flesh, and bones could all unleash terrifying power in the hands of human warriors. After all, the black dragon's cultivation was infinitely close to the emperor level. Drinking its blood and swallowing its flesh could transform a warrior's body. If they were lucky, they could even forge a half-dragon martial body. Its bones could be embedded into weapons to increase the power of the weapon. If Zhang Guanghe and Yinninghong had not been too heavy-handed and directly killed the black dragon's divine soul, if there was even a trace of the divine soul attached to the bones, then the weapon embedded with the black dragon's bones could be called a divine soldier. Of course, its most precious black dragon emperor core contained the Tao meaning of its laws when it was alive. After the demonic Oriole swallowed it, she could slowly fuse it with her own laws and form an even more terrifying Dilly. Kair glanced at it from afar. Although she also wanted a share, she was from the Skylark clan. This noble birth made her unable to let go of her reservations. She couldn't be like the dog spirit and eat the black dragon's internal organs and flesh. It was too disgusting. Sai, a loyal servant. Unfortunately, she followed the wrong person. Seeing this, Makamanji sighed slightly. This black dragon was a true dragon. True dragons were almost extinct on the continent now. The other emperors had the same thoughts as Makamanji. If the black dragon had assisted their sect, they wouldn't have ended up in such a miserable state. The sun god didn't look at the black dragon. It wasn't important to him. When the arrow that killed Xianyuan Wuba passed through the sky, his eyes fell on Qin Hao. Anger, hatred, fear, and struggle alternated on his face. His heart was in a mess. Others didn't know. Perhaps everyone in the world had forgotten that there was a peerless Dendi in the East Continent 600 years ago. But he couldn't forget. The intuition imprinted in the depths of his soul told him. The young man below who had the same name as Dendi was the person from 600 years ago. That person was still alive and had appeared in front of him again. He had just become an emperor, but he had killed Xianyuan Wuba and shown him a stunning arrow. At this time, the vast imperial city was silent. Makamanji and the sun god didn't make any more moves. After this battle, the overall situation was decided. The Xianyuan royal family had declined. The city was littered with corpses, and almost all of the family's experts had died. At present, the few remaining family members had all fled into the temple, trying to rely on the temple's array to save their lives. However, almost everyone had the same thought. They were afraid that even the temple couldn't protect the withered Xianyuan royal family. At this time, the remaining members of the Xianyuan royal family were gathered in the luxurious and noble temple. In fact, the island floating above the city was very large. It was like a small city, and there were many palaces. It was dazzling and showed the supreme authority of the emperor. It was a strong contrast to the ruins of the imperial city below. Even so, it couldn't hide the fear and uneasiness of the people hiding inside. In front of the tallest golden palace, all the people who had fled into the temple were gathered. They looked inside the palace, their faces full of anxiety, fear, and uneasiness. They were all waiting for the emperor's order to see if the Xianyuan family still had a chance to survive. Chang Helo was also among the crowd. Xianyuan Wuying had died in battle. Now, he had lost his last connection and support. He didn't even have the right to enter the emperor's palace. He could only wait silently like the other disciples of the branch family. However, he didn't want to go in. He knew very well that without Xianyuan Wuying, Xianyuan Gaoyan would definitely end his life without hesitation if he offended him in the slightest. The family members guarding the door were all anxious, but so were the people in the palace. Inside the palace, countless elders, concubines, and princes were all nervously looking at Xianyuan Gaoyan. Xianyuan Gaoyan was covered in wounds. He was severely injured, but he didn't care about his injuries. He sat on the throne with Xuanyuan's halberd next to him. He stretched out one hand and a white halo flickered in his palm. The power of the doctrine was constantly injected into the halo. Everyone looked at this and didn't dare to breathe. They could faintly see through the halo that there was an incomplete soul inside. The soul was very weak. It seemed that if anyone suddenly made a sound, the soul inside the halo would be destroyed. Everyone knew that it was Xianyuan Wuba's soul fragment. Emperor, you can't waste any more energy. Please cherish your dragon body. After a long time, an elder finally couldn't stand it anymore. He knelt heavily on the ground with tears running down his face. This elder was covered in blood. Some of it was his own, and some of it was his enemy's. There was a knife wound on his chest that had almost cut through his body. He was relying on the weak Dilly to heal his injury and keep his body alive. He definitely couldn't go out and fight like this. This was the last remaining elder in the direct line of descent. He looked at Xianyuan Gaoyan. The emperor was being chased by Zhang Guanghe and Yiningho. He had broken the seal of the Night Net Palace and saved Xianyuan Wuba's soul fragment. However, his own injuries were definitely not lighter than this elder's. Xianyuan Gaoyan was just holding on. If he continued to inject Dilly into Xianyuan Wuba's soul fragment, Xianyuan Gaoyan was afraid that he would die from exhaustion. Get lost! With a low roar, an invisible emperor's aura filled with killing intent blasted out. The elder who spoke was blown away and crashed into a dragon pillar in the palace. The dragon pillar was covered in cracks. Xianyuan Gaoyan didn't even raise his head. The power of the doctrine flowed through his palm and into the soul fragment. This was his son, his first son. Although he wasn't the only one, he was responsible for the future of the Xianyuan clan. Xianyuan Wuba couldn't die. Even if his soul was incomplete and turned into a retard, Xianyuan Gaoyan wouldn't allow him to die. Plop, plop, plop. Many people knelt on the ground. In the palace, all the direct line members were sobbing. How could the dignified southern proud emperor's family be reduced to such a state? Do you want to die too? Xianyuan Gaoyan slowly raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot. How dare they force him to give up on Xianyuan Wuba? Slap. However, when he raised his head, he was met with a slap on his face. The ball of soul fragment in his hand was also smashed into nothingness. At this moment, Xianyuan Wuba's painful howl before his death seemed to come from the palace. How dare you! Xianyuan Gaoyan's face was distorted. He grabbed the air and a halberd appeared in his hand. He grabbed the collar of the person in front of him and raised him up. He pressed the tip of the halberd against the person's forehead, piercing through the flawless white skin and leaving a trace of blood. It was a woman wearing a noble phoenix robe. She emitted a majestic aura. Facing the furious Xianyuan Gaoyan, she didn't frown even though she was crying. Stab it. If you still know who you are, then stab it, said the empress. Her tears fell and dripped onto Xianyuan Gaoyan's blood-stained palm. They flowed into his wound and mixed with his blood, giving him a burning sensation. Wuba and Wuying are both my sons. They died for the royal family. I am proud of their deaths. But what about you? A dignified emperor only lost a small battle. Who in the world can remain undefeated forever? Just go out and fight again. But you lost your composure and lost your mind. How can you still be the emperor? Chapter 1595. Xianyuan Gaoyan had never tasted defeat in his life. In terms of martial arts, he had always crushed his enemies. If Sun God and Sword Emperor had legendary halos, then Xianyuan Gaoyan was the pioneer. He was unparalleled in the southern region even before they became famous. But today he had lost. For the first time in his life, he tasted the pain of defeat. It was a terrible defeat. Before this battle, he didn't take the Jing tribe and Night Net Palace seriously. Even if Sun God and Li Yuan hadn't arrived, he wasn't worried. But in the end, the battle gradually got out of his control and developed in a bad way that he had never thought of. He had underestimated his enemy. It was all his fault. As the emperor, he had believed too much in the strength of his tribe and overlooked the hidden trump cards of his opponent. The Flute Beast Master from the Jing tribe had disrupted the rhythm of the Xianyuan army's counterattack. The Renhuang army that formed the Phoenix battle formation was very strong. Even the direct descendants of the Xianyuan royal family couldn't compete with them. They were obviously not from the Jing tribe or Night Net Palace, but from external help. The destruction of the Great City Barrier Formation and the four formation spirits made Xianyuan Gaoyan realize that there was a peerless figure in the enemy's formation whose cultivation was far above his. This person was skilled in formations. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to break through the four formation spirit. The appearance of Zhang was the last straw that broke the Xianyuan royal family's back. If he had saved his army in time, he might have had a chance to fight back. But now, fighting again was like hitting a rock with an egg. It was all his fault. He didn't understand the situation of both sides in advance. He had lost soldiers and generals, and his family was in danger. Now that he thought about it, all the sudden changes in the battle were probably caused by Qin Hao because the Jing tribe and Night Net Palace didn't have such power. Such shrewdness and planning. What a good young man. Xianyuan Gaoyan laughed bitterly. Only then did he realize that the person who defeated him today wasn't the Jing tribe, Night Net Palace, and Zhang. It was Qin Hao. Qin Hao alone overturned his entire Xianyuan royal family and erased the southern proud empire from the southern region. Xianyuan Gaoyan had never admired anyone in his life. Even the sword emperor of the southern region, Sun God, and all the other emperors didn't have anything special about them. But he had to admit that Qin Hao was powerful. Have you thought it through? Emperor Xuanyuan's empress caressed the man's face as she spoke gently. Xianyuan Gaoyan held his halberd tightly and stood up. He nodded and smiled at the empress. At that moment, he regained his dignity as the great emperor of the South Ao kingdom. He glanced at the injured people and asked, "Gentlemen, do you still have the strength to fight with me? I pledge my life to follow the emperor. I pledge my life to follow the emperor." They pledged their lives to follow the sovereign lord. Inside the palace, their shouts shook the heavens, echoing outside the palace. Their incomparably firm voices were filled with battle intent, condensing into a united spirit. Even if the Xianyuan royal family was defeated, what was there to fear? Xianyuan Gaoyan looked on with gratification. His heart was filled with an indescribable pain. Right or wrong didn't matter anymore. At this point, there was no possibility of reconciliation between the two sides. Outside the palace, there was a loud roar. Xianyuan Gaoyan knew that the other party was trying to break through the great array. He couldn't predict the final outcome and couldn't guarantee that he would lead his people to fight their way out. The only thing he could do was lead his people to fight. Even if they died in battle, at least they would die with dignity. Beside him, the Empress of the South Ao Xianyuan royal family, Empress Jin Qiu, looked at her man. She slowly reached out her hand and clasped it tightly with Xianyuan Gaoyan's. If he lived, she would live. If he died, she would follow. At that moment, it was as if they had returned to the past, to the time when they were young. Back then, he had been unparalleled. Back then, she had been standing beside him, radiant and dazzling, just like she was now. Outside the palace, the void was densely packed with martialists. There were Yuan venerates, Yuan sovereigns, and Yuan emperors. The auras of Yuan emperors were powerful and oppressive. The ground in the city was occupied by the Zheng tribe and the Night Azura Palace. They covered the sky and covered the ground, surrounding the floating island. Everyone's eyes fell on the light screen that shrouded the island. This was the last and strongest array of the Xianyuan royal family. Once this array was broken, South Ao would cease to exist. At that moment, a sharp pitch-black beam of light pierced forward, circulating with a terrifying radiance of Dao validation. It pierced the boundary of the palace. However, when Yining Hong's attack landed on the barrier, it didn't cause the slightest ripple. It was as if it had sunk into a quagmire. Zhang Guang, he stepped forward. The old man's clothes fluttered as he emitted a majestic, domineering blade light. The resplendent blade intent resonated with the heavens and earth, as if he had become the true essence of the great Tao of the blade. He slashed down with his palm. His palm shot out 9 rays of light that condensed into one. 100-feet-long crescent blade radiance flew out in front of him and blasted on the light screen of the palace. Suddenly, the sound of a blade whistling shook the sky. The light screen flickered and absorbed the majestic blade intent of the Tao validation Great Emperor. After a simple reply, Zhang Guang he closed his eyes and behaved as if everything that happened today had nothing to do with him. A moment ago, he was an extremely violent and ferocious old man. In the next second, he became a kind old man in front of Qin Hao. Many of the upper echelons of the overlords looked at Zhang Guang and felt a little strange. This was a saber emperor who had proven his Tao and dared to fight head-on with Xianyuan Gaoyan. Why was he so kind and humble in front of a junior like Qin Hao? Although it was a little strange, everyone didn't pay much attention to it. When Zhang Guang rushed to the battlefield, he said that he was a subordinate force of Dan Go. Although Zhang Guang was a saber emperor, he still had a superior and subordinate relationship with Qin Hao. This array is difficult to break. I can only ask my master for help. Qin Hao glanced at the array of the temple. In his previous life, he had been blocked by this array. He had tried it once. Now, if he wanted to break it, he could only pin his hopes on Muri. As he spoke, Qin Hao shouted toward the battleship in the distance. Accompanied by a ball of flowing light, the white-haired Miaoli, who was dressed in plain Taoist robes and had a veil covering her face, walked to Qin Hao's side under the accompaniment of a few Night Net Palace elders. Suddenly, Makamanji, Sun God, Emperor Luo, Emperor Ming, Li Yuan, and the other emperors looked over. Was this the expert who had defeated the beast spirits of the four sides of Xianyuan Imperial City with one blow? What was this person's cultivation level? Pairs of saber emperors looked at Muri, trying to see through her cultivation level. However, Muri's aura was like nothing. If it weren't for her ability to fly, everyone would have thought that she was an ordinary person. A big shot from the Divine Palace. Emperor Sword and Emperor Luo looked at each other. Both of them were in awe and hurriedly looked away. The others followed suit. In the face of an expert who couldn't see through her cultivation level, it would be rude to continue like this. Master. Qin Hao bowed slightly. His senior sister's hunched figure looked even older. Get out of the way. Miaoli slowly spoke. As Qin Hao and the rest dispersed, she extended her skinny twig-like arm, revealing a hand that was filled with wrinkles. She slowly lifted it. At this moment, the space was incomparably silent. All the emperors present focused their attention and released their divine souls to perceive everything that happened in the great Tao of space. They couldn't see through Muri's cultivation level. They could only analyze how much stronger Muri's cultivation level was compared to them by sensing the subtle changes caused by the great Tao of heaven and earth and combining it with their own Tao. Countless people were tense, not daring to breathe. A peerless powerhouse who instantly annihilated the beast spirits of the four sides of the Xianyuan Imperial City. Every change and usage of her Tao was worthy of being comprehended by all the emperors. As Muri stretched out her palm, a pure white jade ruler appeared between heaven and earth. It emitted an incomparably dazzling platinum radiance. Wisps of platinum radiance flowed and merged with the great Tao of heaven and earth. It was as if the jade ruler itself was transformed from the great Tao, possessing the complete Tao of Wuk. Miao Li's gaze fell on the barrier of the lookout. The emperor's aura around her gradually surged. Like the other emperors, it was also platinum in color. However, the difference was that her emperor's aura wouldn't destroy any element. The space didn't tremble under her imperial radiance. The air flowed like water, and the wind brushed past everyone's faces like silk. Everything was calm. At this time, the emperors couldn't help but tremble. What kind of ability was needed to be able to use Dili to such perfection? It was perfectly compatible with the Great Tao, as if it was the origin of the Great Tao. Break. Muri spat out a word. Her imperial will merged into the Tao sovereign ruler. She could feel that the array formation that enveloped the shrine in front of her was very strong. Although it wasn't as strong as the barrier of the Divine Palace, it had reached the flawless realm. A flawless array formation wasn't inferior to an flawless heavenly emperor's full defense. Therefore, even if she made a move, she would need to use the Tao sovereign ruler to break the array formation.